Good evening and welcome to the Joint Town Council Special Meeting and Budget Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 15th, fittingly tax day. So it is 7 o'clock and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Peter Talbot.
Here.
Jim Jenks.
Here.
Dina Allard. Here. John Mylone.
Here.
Don Walsh.
Here.
David Belber.
Here.
Fiona Pearson.
Here.
Greg Wolf. Tricia Kramer. A quorum is present.
Please rise for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we are back at it tonight for a general review and discussion of the fiscal year 25-26 operating and capital budgets. I doubt we're going to talk any capital tonight, but we certainly will talk operating. So to kick it off, in your packets is a munis sheet. There's about 9 pages, I guess. So Sunday night after I got back from, I was in Rhode Island over the weekend, but when I got home, and once you get in your own environment and have time to think, thoughts immediately turned to budget, of course. So I asked Sean, and I made it specific that please don't do it tonight or even think about doing it tonight, but for Monday, could we get a look at where Cheshire Public Schools are spending wise with 10 weeks to go in the fiscal year? So this was the document that I know that Sean worked with Jim Jascott as well as, I believe, someone from, thanks Ben, yeah, that's good, from Vin's office. So I appreciate this. And I wanted to get a look as, to see if there's, anything that could be done. So working off of this sheet, the first one that I had a question about, and it may affect other ones as we go down the line. The first one is 511,300 teachers under certified salaries. It was a starting budget of $36,935,314. Year-to-date expenditures, and this was printed again on April 14th, yesterday. So, and the expended, let me get back here. The expended year-to-date was $22,351,240.73.
What number are you at, Peter?
The fourth line item down on this sheet.
300.
511,300. Just the teachers? Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
just teachers. So it was the 37 million to start, 22.3 spent, month to date 1.4. Vin, can you tell me the encumbrances of 13,650? What is that? What's encumbered, and where does that cover you? To what date or period in time are you encumbered?
Okay. So just to make sure everybody understands, an encumbrance is money that we are setting aside because we know we're going to spend it. And so when you look at our payroll accounts, and after I get done answering your question, this is a better report to look at.
Okay.
This is our monthly finance report the board gets. So what we do with the teachers is we do encumber most of the salaries for the fiscal year. And then as we approach the end of the year, and we have 2.5 months of payroll left, we also have to pay teachers there's teachers that get 26 pays, so they get pays over the summer even though the school year ends June 12th this year. So we encumber most of it, but not all of the salaries that are owed to the teachers.
Okay, so in the encumbrances should be the July and August for teachers that choose to get paid on a 12-month basis. even though it's in the next fiscal year, you were encumbered to pay it out of this budget?
Correct.
Okay,
And most of it's encumbered. There are portions of pay that are not encumbered in this line. So as we go through the next, 2.5 months of payroll, we will settle up with the encumbrances. Now, I know, just because I understand where we are this year, we will have monies remaining in the teacher line. However, if you look at the next line down, the 511, 400 substitutes, interns,
yep,
you'll see that one of the line items, not the one that says long-term, the substitute interns, it's over budget 140,000. And we still haven't encumbered all of the funds that we'll need to pay substitutes through the June time period.
Is there a
So
reason
I
why
know
that's so
that-
much different, why you're so much in the hole there? Is there?
Well, if there's teacher vacancies and we put a substitute in, we'll have less expenditure out of the teacher line,
Mhm.
but we'll have more expenditures out of the substitute line. So what I'm
Less
saying
money,
is those
yes.
accounts, there will be offsets between those two accounts.
Okay. But yeah, you had budgeted 670 and you're already at 831, so.
Yeah, and we're gonna go, last year we went $1 million roughly in that account. So,
So why do we only budget, why would you only budget 670? I don't even know what you have budgeted in this budget currently, but.
yeah, well, so that we don't over budget for the difference between
Because you
teacher
don't know what the
vacancies
teachers are.
and substitute costs.
Okay.
So, otherwise if we budgeted exactly what we need
It'll
for
balance out.
substitutes,
Yeah, so
then we would be over budget.
Right,
And we
okay.
try not to do that.
that's a good thing.
So been looking at this, instructional assistance line, that was only, so 82.7% used.
So, good question. Instructional assistants, we do not encumber their salaries for the most part. We pay as we go. So, one of the things that will happen, and maybe it's a good time to look, if you look at this report, this is through March 31st, but this is the report that the Board of Ed received at our meeting last week. The information on this report is just a little bit more concise, but it will help me explain how we will go through the next 3 months to settle up the budget. So, the first thing you'll see in this top section, where the teachers have a remaining balance of $863,000, I'm projecting that we'll end the year with $114,000, but I need to offset the negative in substitutes interns. Okay, so this gap will continue to increase as we get through April, May, and then into June. But you could see that one account offsets the other, is the example I'm showing. If you look at the next line, the next section down, those are our classified salaries, so it's the secretaries, it's our maintenance staff, it's our paras. As we get through I'm pretty sure, and we haven't done our final projections, but our paras might be slightly over budget this year. But we'll be able to offset some of the differences within some of the other lines, in particular support services. So when you look at salaries on the Board of Ed, some salaries are encumbered, and those are the ones that are gonna be above 90% in that column that says percent of budget expended and encumbered. So if you look at teachers, 97.7%. Then if you look at paras, only 79% is expended and encumbered, because we don't encumber for the paraprofessionals' pay. Same thing, if you look at the drivers, they're about 72% expended and encumbered. So as you look at salaries, it's a combination of some salaries encumbered, some not encumbered. If you flip to page 2, on this report, again, I'll get through this quickly because I'm sure you have other questions, but in that top section called instruction, the third line down called tuition outplaced, that you can see that we're over budget by 37,205. That's always a line. These are for the students that we outplace, that we cannot provide special ed services in district. That account is always an account that, can go, way over budget. Fortunately, this year, it's looking pretty sound, and the fact that we're only a little bit over budget, is a good thing. But I have to offset that $37,000 overage against, right now, the instructional supply and the textbook software account. So that's the methodology that we'll use as we get to the end of the year to balance the budget. Now, April, May, June, there's a lot of different things are happening. One is we're starting to, do some projections on our non-encumbered salaries, so we know where we're gonna wind up. We're also looking at what are the requests that we have for items that we need to do over the summer. We always, purchase the educational supplies. We'll be sending out a memo to the staff around the end of April, because that's when the state provides their bid list for all the supplies, so we have to, make those purchases. We're also looking at what maintenance items we need to do. I will give you a couple of tidbits of things that I know I have to account for. One is the technology purchases. We have about 370 students coming into 7th grade at Dodd next year, and we provide a Chromebook to each of the Dodd students, which they keep through grade 12. So we have to purchase 370. We're getting our quotes now for it, but that's probably about it's $111,000, assuming a unit cost of $277 each.
And which one is that again, Vin?
It's not reflected in
Oh,
here,
okay.
but what I'm
All right.
saying is, I have to, as we get ready for close out of the year, I have to make sure I have enough for technology. The Chromebooks is just one piece of it. We also have to replace some desktops, some monitors, and I'm looking at a list that was provided by our technology director. It includes smartboard replacements. It's $340,000. I can't do all of that.
But none of that's in
What's
this?
remaining. No, but what I'm saying is, as I'm planning for year end, I have to make sure we start encumbering
Right.
for that. That's not reflected in this report yet. It's just, March is too early.
And that
April and
curriculum
May.
materials at 30,000 that you haven't done anything with, that's kind of what you're doing it for next year?
Exactly. And the last thing that I'll mention, and I'm not trying to give you my tale of woes, because I'm just trying to explain how we work to get to a budget to zero typically, but if we have to reserve $200,000 this year, then that's what we'll work toward. As we open up our budget at the beginning of the year, we let our department staff and our principals know they can only expend X percentages of their line items. So instructional supplies, or textbooks, or our maintenance department, they can only expend 70% of their available budget. That's the hold that we have in place now. And as I know that we didn't have any unexpected overages, like in special education, outplaced tuition, then we free up some more money. So, the board can never exceed its appropriated budget, and that's the only way we have to manage the budget, by holding back dollars until we know we can commit them. So if what we have to do is turn back 200,000 at the end of the year, we'll just, manage it accordingly by under-expending those line items, not salaries, but anything in instructional, anything in support services, which is the next line down, and maintenance and repair as well.
So then I have a quick question on, so when we're looking at administration, and I know that there was, an administrator who left last year and wasn't replaced until January. So the balance of the salary that was left, shouldn't that be higher than what I see here at 20? Oh, was it
Now, if
27?
you look at the principal, if you look at this line on this sheet, the third line down,
Principal,
principal, assistant principal,
Okay,
you see that there's a current balance of 173,000.
right,
So that's where the bulk of that is. The person who left is Mary Gadd.
But there's no year-end balance, even though,
Well, I haven't done those projections yet, Don. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying to you. Those, it's too early to
To tell.
realistically say I'll have X dollars remaining at the end of the year.
So that all the ones that you have zero on, you just haven't.
The projections are not done. They are
So
not
what,
done.
just out of curiosity, the very last one, heat and energy, where you have 579 as a budget, you expended 434, probably not gonna have a lot of heat left in the rest of the year. And there's 145,000, is that one you'll likely have excess money on and then
I think
put to
so.
something else?
I mean, even though I'm not sure we have paid for all our latest fills in that number
Mhm.
by the end of March, John, but yeah, I would expect that we'll have a remaining balance there. The maintenance and repair, it's been a bad 4-week period. We dealt with, we had a leak, steam leak this morning at Doolittle. Was a pipe let go inside the wall. We had a water main, I was showing Andrew some pictures of the water main break that we had at Doolittle. We had part of the roof at Chapman blew off last month. And then we had a sewer clog at Humiston last week that they couldn't rotor it, so they had to, go from the street and use a jet to clean it out, so those add expenses that, will be reflected. It's not out of the ordinary, those types of repairs, it's just out of the ordinary that they came in rapid succession. So those are the things that we'll, make sure that we've got accounted for as we go through the next couple of months.
Question, one of the things was Mike Woods leaving. Was that in last fiscal year or is that in this fiscal year? When did Mike?
No, but the Mike Woods budget dollars
Right.
are
Paying,
being used
the
for
rear
Emily
assistant.
Taylor, the
Okay.
assistant COO.
So the bottom line is, I mean, you offered 200 back on this. You don't really know that. That was just an estimate, but you're
So
talking
we'll
about things that.
manage,
You'll
we'll
manage
manage
to
to
that-
the
to that number.
200,000 by not doing everything
Sure,
that we're asked
But
to
we
do.
can't, we can't go line by line because you don't know and you're holding some of these for other things, quite frankly.
Yeah, well,
They're
we know
one
that
line,
there's
but they
some
might be
expenditures
held
we
to.
have to make.
And you've already reduced, right, because in this sheet, many of these line items have been reduced already by 15%. So there are a number of these line items that you have already, in your 2.21 million, you're already recommending a reduction
But that's for next year.
for next year, yeah.
Yes.
this is coming out of this year.
This is this year's to see
Yeah,
what's
this
left
is
over
this year.
towards next year, yeah.
Right.
And just,
But in looking at the line item, seeing, comparing
For next
this
year,
year's and
yes.
then next year's and then what's gonna be.
I thought we're up to 250. I thought there was an email that.
I didn't see
I thought I saw that email
I
somewhere.
thought
too.
there was
You probably
an
remember
email that
this?
said there was that they found an extra
Wishful
50,000. Did you
thinking.
not see that?
I thought Jeff found a fifty,
Because of
They said
the
at the end of the
curriculum.
Tuesday meeting, I think that I have 250 in our placeholder.
I saw
on the
150.
mill rate worksheet. I can't recall.
I
who
got the
else-
gavel, I can awesome it right now.
Well, here's 75. But yes, it is 250 in the mill rate worksheet, which we'll get to after, but that was highlighted for discussion.
Okay, no, that's fine, because I thought we still got an email that said
Yeah.
there was a potential for an extra 50. I think that's.
I know there was, further discussion that Jeff had, and what Jeff was suggesting that part of that overage in the principal line could be allocated.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I just want to make it clear that we can manage to the number, if it's 200 or 250, it comes at the expense of something else, but, this is the reality that, we're all faced with. So that's the number we have to manage to. I'm confident we can do it, I just want everybody to understand there are trade-offs
Yeah.
that we'll make.
And
What is the number you can't manage to?
251.
forgetting the salaries and that stuff, employee benefits, so starting with, let's let's go to page 4 of this one, and I'm sorry, I'm
You want
going
the
to
Munis?
this one.
That's okay.
You want
We're
the
still
Munis?
I'm
going
going
last
back to the Munis one,
year.
page
Last year,
4.
okay. We're still working on last year.
Because it breaks it out, Vinnie's, the one Vinnie handed out consolidates some of the accounts.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So like under, he's got heat and energy, on this one, that's broken out into heat and energy, fuel oil, and propane heat energy. So,
What page are you on?
well, I'm going to page 4 is where I wanna go.
Oh.
No, he's.
There's no heat and energy.
He's just giving an example for.
Oh, yeah, it's not heat and energy, I was using that as an example of the difference between Vinnie's sheet
Okay.
and the one I'm working off of, because this one breaks it out more, there's more line item categories. So I was looking at 564-100, which is the 4th item down, it's textbooks and software. There's currently like 65 grand in there. My question was, when we get into some of these, and curriculum materials is another one, replacement equipment, new equipment, which is the last 2 items before support services, there's some balances in there. My question was, with 10 weeks left in the school, or 10 weeks left in the fiscal year, is there an opportunity to freeze any of these accounts that could give us additional over the 250?
But that's exactly what we're doing with that 70% hold. That's we're essentially out freeze. So, again, if the request is to go higher than 250, then there are things that we won't do. And just maybe to give you a sense, every year at this time, we ask our principals and our managers to put together a list of the items that they need to purchase with the remaining 30% of the dollars that we haven't released to them. And I usually get $700,000 to $800,000 worth of requests, and then we pare that down to what can we actually do based on the dollars remaining. So the more we take out of this year, the more pressure we have on next year. So I know if you look at these balances, you say, well, can you get more? But what I'm telling you is, to get to the 2 or the 250, we're going to use some of these balances.
And you mentioned something about buying Chromebooks for the kids going into and that's not a line item anywhere? That's interesting. It's a big number, but it's not a line item.
So the Chromebook purchases would come out of the 5732 account, which is on page 7. And
Capital equipment?
Capital equipment.
yeah, and that's computer capital equipment, and you see there's an available budget of 36,000 remaining there. So I have to borrow from some of those other accounts to be able to make that Chromebook purchase. And now I can use the new equipment account, there's funds remaining there, which is the account that you were just looking at, Peter.
Yeah. Which is the one on page 4, 57-3100.
Right.
And then right above it, replacement equipment, I guess you could probably tap that,
Yeah.
because it is replacement equipment for older Chromebooks if you're getting newer ones.
So the tuition of private schools, which is going to be the -113, is there a reason for that, or is that the 556002?
The beginning, the second item
Page
down on page 4.
Yeah, that's the tuition, that one is special education outplaced tuition. Some of it is offset by the line above, which is tuition outplaced. That's for general ed students that attend magnet schools typically. So, those two offset when you look at this report. There's just one line for tuition outplaced. So, on the report I just showed you, the negative is 37,000 because the 118
Okay.
less the 70.
The other thing was, noticed the sports transportation is negative 111. Was there a reason why we're so far up on that? And you had a budget of 207 total? Or is that, am I reading that wrong?
No, so, you know,
Page
some of
6.
the overages in pupil transportation will be offset by some under budget, but I do expect pupil transportation will be a bit over budget at the end of the year this year, because we have had to add some additional runs because of enrollment. But, I mean, nothing that is a budget buster.
No,
But
it's just
it is,
curious.
you know, that's the balance.
Well, when you
that
see
we
a
strike.
six-figure negative, I just, what is it?
Because you're talking about public transportation, but you're
Yeah.
talking about the sports
Sports
transportation,
transportation.
which
Yeah.
is that one.
So here's the other part, there's one more piece to this. And you'll see that those dollars are all encumbered. One of the things that we have to do over the next couple of months is look at the encumbrances and see, well, maybe we've over encumbered for sports. So the fact that it's over doesn't mean I've spent it.
Right.
It means that between what I've spent and what's remaining encumbered, I'm over.
So you might find you only spend 95,000 and there's
Correct.
40,000 left over.
Correct. So there's a whole reconciliation that gets done. We look at every open purchase order as we get, you know, into May and June, just to make sure that, you know, we will meet our budget. And anything that's over encumbered, that becomes available in the budget again. But it's always pluses and minuses. There are some, you know, items that are under encumbered. I just mentioned the substitutes. We're not fully encumbered there yet.
I'm just curious about one thing, because this is my sixth budget, but the only time I ever remember any kind of surplus was through the COVID time, when we weren't going to school, but we had a surplus there. But, like, at the end of the year, do you, like, the last 5 years, 4 years, whatever, we didn't get any surplus rollover, so does that mean that you ended even, exactly even? There's nothing left over each year?
Well,
Yes, and we do.
we saw the solution we saw in Y today. This exercise was very eye-opening, because Vin has a pocket of additional expenses that he's got ready to use for the other money. It's
Right.
just that simple. Chromebooks,
yeah.
he mentioned, other things. I mean, it's a process, it's a
So you
deliberate
have something left
process.
over and you need to buy something, okay, well, I can take this money and use it on this.
Or he moves things from category to category, he works hard the last
Right.
So
2 months of the budget year.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. There's one more piece. So how do we get to zero? Well, we encumber what we know we need to make purchases for. Some of those encumbrances will be for transportation or special ed costs.
Mm-hmm.
But then what happens after we close the books, and the board closes its books on the last business day in June, as we get through September, October, if some of those special ed costs don't come through, or we over encumbered for transportation, when we close out those purchase orders, we make Jim Jascott very happy, because that's where, you know, he picks up, you know, depending on the year, a couple of $100,000 in some years. He's a little upset this year, because I don't think we'll have a couple of $100,000, but we don't know yet. So that's where some of those encumbrances, they do come back, you know, to the town side.
And just to remind folks on that piece, we call those canceled encumbrances, and when we do have a higher amount to budget for, those are in our department revenue sheet that we go through, that exercise the other day when we look at rolling years, and it's under miscellaneous revenue, right, Jim?
Right,
So that.
and we are
accounted for
expecting less per
For
conversation.
the conversations, we are budgeting less there than we have in some other years, depending on if there's any actual cancel.
So for example, I mean, this wouldn't have to do with the encumbrances, but for example, this legislation should pass regarding the ECS grant, and we get this additional 211,000. That is something that would come to you later. Let's say and it would go to Jim, yeah, later, just, okay.
Jim doesn't allow any payments to come to me from the state, they go to him.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's not gonna increase his budget, it's not gonna give him more surplus per
That would be
se.
an add-
That's gonna go directly
That would-
into the general
yeah.
fund.
Yeah,
Yes, their expenditure authorization doesn't go up any higher.
yeah.
I mean, it's accounted for as revenue when you look at the overall town's budget, but if.
But we don't know
We
at
don't
this
know
point,
yet.
yeah.
Unclear if it's gonna happen.
Can we ask other questions related to education here?
Sure.
So, Vin, I have a question. I'm trying to understand something, because I thought I was careful when I looked at the book this year. And I spent a lot of time looking at enrollment and class sizes and things like that. And I wasn't smart enough to notice that beyond grade 7 and 8, we don't have anything shown.
High school doesn't work on
So I heard
class
the other,
size.
but I know that, but I heard the other night, there's a ratio of, the superintendent responded to a question, ratio of teachers to students to 14:1. And I know it's not the same thing, but class sizes here in the middle school are 22 or 23, and the other school is 17, 18, 19. Could you explain to me that, and I don't want to see anyone lose their jobs, but is there an opportunity? Are we overstaffed in the high school? And I'd like an honest answer, not just, a textbook answer, because I know it's complicated, so you have to simplify it for me, but tell me the truth, because we need to know the truth. It seems like a big difference, it's half of the number of students to teachers, as in the other schools.
Well, first of all, I always tell the truth.
I know that, but I know you tell the truth, but I really want it in simple terms, and in honest terms. I mean, you can complicate it for me and tell me anything you want me to hear, so.
And very simply, high school work based on class, on course offering.
Mhm.
It's not based on classroom size.
I understand.
So when you look at that ratio, I mean, that is the ratio, and I know, that was the number from Jeff, it's, about 14 if you take the total students divided, by the total number of teachers. It comes out to that ratio of 14:1.
Yeah, it's not,
And the reason it doesn't show up in there is because the high school, again, is based on selection of classes. So there are some classes that are small, and I know that one of the savings that's in that reduction sheet is if we don't replace the chemistry teacher who's retiring, the feeling from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent is we could still have sufficient classes in chemistry without having to replace that chemistry teacher, so that's the trade-off.
Is there a minimum class size? Or like,
No.
so like if you have 6 kids in a class for taking some language or something like that, you still have a teacher teaching it?
Yes.
what do the class sizes range from what to what? Don't have
A
any-
little out of my knowledge base, but, you may have some of the AP classes, which are smaller. So the challenge becomes if you're gonna reduce, teachers in, let's say it's math, are you sacrificing some of those course availability? So, and I think the other part of the answer is, yeah, there is some opportunity at the high school. That's why the chemistry teacher not being replaced kind of speaks to that. Whether or not there's
So how
more.
many teachers do we have there? It's over 100, so it sounds like, if I ask them. I can't tell from here.
Yeah. It's, in the staffing section, and it is somewhere around 100, but this is the certified staff. This top is administrators, and everything from here down are teachers. So it's 123, and then you could see that some of that does include English, business, math. You could see it by
This is all the high school right
department.
here?
This column's all high school.
Okay, just right here. I see.
Okay.
All right,
And
I
I
couldn't
think-
find that.
That includes like social workers are included as part of that count, even though they're not in a classroom, but that is part of the structure for the high school. And it's, those school counselors are certified, that's why it shows up on this page. So you could look at it by department if you'd like to.
In the chem classes are gonna be bigger anyway, John, because of, you're in the lab setting, so to speak, you're in the lecture hall or whatever. So it holds more kids than a classroom does. So when I was 100 years ago, when I was in chemistry there, we probably had 40 or more kids in the room taking chemistry, with one teacher at the time. But you get into, not that I ever took a Latin, but the Latin classes were probably a handful of kids. So it ranges from a handful to probably in the 40s, depending on,
And the teachers can only teach a maximum of so many classes? 5.
5,
And they're all at their max?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 14, that
Yeah.
seems high. I mean, I'm just looking right now, I'm just looking at that Connecticut, and average is like 12 or 13, so 14 sounds to be on the high side. I don't know if.
For a high
and that's
school.
for a high school, yeah.
I don't know if Jeff released, I know it was in his budget presentation, but he had a slide that showed where we relative to other school districts and, if anything,
Yeah,
we're in the
very-
middle of the pack,
At the ratio of students?
Yeah.
to the teachers at the
Central
high
Michigan
school
University is
level.
14-1
Yeah.
right now, so Central is. But that's, grad classes are 6 students, but then you have lectures that are 200, so it.
So question, as we go forward with Darcy, what's the plan there, and is there a way to, who's still there, what's still being done at Darcy, and I think Councilwoman Allard had put together a nice list of comments that people had put together, and there was a question about Darcy and what's, do we need a full principal at Darcy? Do we need a full staff there? What's the situation at Darcy? And is there any ways to sort of roll some of those responsibilities into other administrators to sort of, cut back on the cost at Darcy?
You're talking about for this
For the
upcoming year,
upcoming year,
not when
yeah.
we move to the new school.
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's one building administrator at Darcy.
There's no separate principal for Darcy?
That's
Okay,
it.
oh, that's it.
There's one building administrator. I certainly wouldn't want to leave a building without an administrator in there at all times, especially, that building. You do, it's little children, a lot of special ed. And actually, that special ed population in the last couple of months has increased, by quite a few. I mean, 6 new special ed students that, I know we're talking about budget. It puts pressure back on the budget because we have to provide door-to-door transportation for those students. So
and a lot
I don't
of
see any opportunity there.
But
no.
are there still kindergartners there?
No,
Okay, they're all back to their local school.
yes.
Right, thank you.
And that's what, it's birth to 3,
It's birth to 3, it's special ed,
Early
pre-K,
intervention.
right? That's,
Yep.
and there's
And
the
then
early
the-
intervention and the reverse mainstream. We also have 2 classes of pre-K Smart Start, which is the full-day program. But those parents pay for that. They pay tuition for that program. It is a full-day program for pre-K. The other classes are half-day programs.
So how many are in there?
What's that?
How many total students are in there?
Students, yeah.
About 120.
It's too big for any rooms.
No, but it seems like that's a lot of salary for a small amount of people.
The programs are so specialized. The furniture and the things they do for those children are just off the charts amazing, so.
Yeah, my daughter went through that. Well, she was one of the mainstream students for the students with needs in there.
Yeah, we were there last
amazing.
week, because moving into the new building, some of the specialized, we call it furniture pieces, but there's just not really furniture. They're all designed to, stimulate children, accommodate their special needs. There are IEPs on some of these, little kids, 3 and 4 years old. They need to increase their upper body strength, so they have these tubes that they crawl in that they could exercise their upper body. And it's just amazing the things that we have invented and use at Darcy that, you know, we have to figure out, you know, all these pieces, you can't duplicate them necessarily, you can't buy them out of a catalog, you know, so we're working with the architects on, do we take some of these, can we replace them, are they refinished and put into the new school? And the interesting thing that I found out that I didn't know is most of those pieces were built using prison labor, you know, about 30 and 40 years ago. I mean, some of the materials that they showed me were, you know, these things were designed, and then they were working with a prison official out of Weathersfield, and they built these things. And I mean, they've lasted, you know, 30 plus years, and some of them are being held together with duct tape, unfortunately. But if you listen to the staff talk about what they do with these pieces, they have cutouts and they flip them this way and they put a tray in that way. It's just unbelievable. All designed though to help these, you know, children get a, you know, a good head start on their lives, and it makes a difference. And I know that, you know, Carol Talbot worked there for a lot of years, so I don't have to explain it to you, but it is just, every time I go there and I watch what they do, I'm just floored.
With the program, but there's no way to cut the administrative cost of that. That becomes
I think you're pretty thinly staffed, having just one administrator with no backup.
Now, you said there is tuition being paid on some?
On the Smart Start program is a full-day program. Reverse Mainstream is a half-day program. And reverse mainstream means that, you know, for every special ed child, there's a general ed student that can be in that same room, and those parents do pay, you know, for that.
Yeah, we paid. It was a minimal, it was under the child care, but we thought it was just a great experience for them.
But it doesn't cover costs, it just
Cover some.
Anything else?
What about healthcare? We talk about it some more? So I'm
I
getting
can
a
talk
lot
about
of.
healthcare all day.
I know. A lot of constituents have raised questions over the issue that the healthcare has not been bid in many years. I know you've explained that we really don't pay specifically, we deal with an administrative cost, but I've been told that that's actually a partial response, and that there's an opportunity to split up aspects of healthcare, et cetera, to get preferable rates, and there may be substantial savings available. I don't know enough about it then, but for instance, I've been told that prescription can be set to a separate provider, and oftentimes there's substantial savings on prescription, on the prescription side of the healthcare. Have you ever explored that, and is that possible?
Well, not that we haven't explored it, we've done it. We've had a prescription carved out to a couple of different providers in our PPO and HMO plans, not in our high deductible health plan, because, you know, that's all part of the overall cost. You know, by having it integrated, there's advantages to having it integrated, there's advantages to having it outsourced.
Because the cost of the prescriptions add to the deductible, right? Is that?
Oh, it does,
Yeah.
yeah, so, you know.
And that's all done by the current carrier,
It's Cigna.
right?
And just to be clear, so we do have a broker that is, you know, our consultant from USI, and then Cigna is our provider for medical in prescription and dental. We did bid that out, and, you know, Anthem had been the provider for, we never even actually found the date, but probably at least 3 decades. So we moved it to Cigna. On the administrative side, the service has been much better. Cigna, within their own program, outside of what we do, they do very good job managing claims, making recommendations for how do we keep our prescription costs, you know, in line. You know, we know that there's prescription is growing at a faster rate than any other portion, medical, dental, or prescription. Does that mean we shouldn't look at what we do? Well, we do look at what we do. You know, I know that everybody's gonna have an opinion, but, you know, the only way to know is their savings is to, you know, either find another consultant to help us, going out to bid, and it's not that anybody's opposed to going to bid for the provider, or even breaking out the pharmacy, but it's gotta be studied, you know, and quotes have to be obtained, and we do have to work with each of the unions, because each of the contracts, you know, have provisions for like same coverage, you know, and that's always, you know, a source of dispute, and the way we get around that is when we go to bid, like we did when we selected Cigna, we had all the union presidents invited to be part of the process, so they were with us when the RFP was issued, when we interviewed the firms, and when we ultimately selected Cigna. You know, and that process worked well, it wasn't problem-free. We did have, you know, some threats of grievances after we made the switch, but, you know, that's, you know, we've moved well past that. One of the pressure points, and I know I shared this in the email, but we meet with Cigna, we have a standing meeting every 2 weeks, and then we do a full review of all our claims with their senior leadership team, and they bring in everybody that, you know, needs to speak about pharmacy and dental and medical. They point out things that we can do, programs that we can take advantage of. One of the pressure points is definitely these GLP-1 drugs. You know, I shared that Cigna is launching a program June 15th that we're looking at. I think we'll take advantage of it, you know, to help make sure that, you know, first of all, patients are getting the drugs they need when they need it, you know, because you can't get a GLP-1 unless it's prescribed. And if the doctor's prescribing it, we can't say, no, you can't have that particular drug, although we can have them replaced for a lower cost generic. But it is something that, you know, will help.
Let me ask, because,
And by the way, GLP-1s are not the only, and
How much
in
do we
fact, they're
spend
not
on-
the most expensive.
How much did we
Of the
spend on
drugs.
GLP-1 last year?
I'll take a look in the book when we break
And
here.
is that, the use of that, is that just for medical uses, or is that for, is it allowed in our program for weight loss and things like that as well? Is that, or do we pay for it for that, or is it just,
Well, it's not,
it's just
here's
for
the thing, John.
diabetes, or?
If the doctor's prescribing it, doesn't prescribe it necessarily for weight loss or diabetes, the doctor is prescribing a drug. And so, yeah, it's part of the plan, it is covered. As Don pointed out, if it's a drug like that, does go against the employee deductible first. And then in the high deductible health plan, there's you know, when an employee has met their deductible, they still have a 20% co-share, so they have to pay for a portion of it. And I think that's you know, one of the problems with these GLP-1 drugs, that you don't know what they're being prescribed for. Is it strictly weight loss? That may not be a bad thing, right? But
Except it's
well,
expensive.
because I think what we're getting at, because you gave the Board of Ed a list of the drugs, and I went and looked at the drug, and the one that's glaring is the Ozempic, which is $872 per script, and there's 42, it looks like. So that's almost $500,000 just on that one drug that it's costing. And I know, like, when you have a private healthcare plan, if you're in, you know, you're not part of it, a lot of the times these private healthcares will not approve some of these drugs, even though your doctor might prescribe it. And I just wonder, who decides that? Is that Cigna who decides that, whether they're gonna approve it or not? Or?
So that's $500,000, just say, and that's against our portion of the expense. In other words, the insurance company has no kind of responsibility for that. That's part of our self-insurance, all of that, or is that not correct?
oh yeah, I mean, it's a claim.
So
But the $500,000 that you're doing the 42
I just go 42 times, yeah, 871.
Right, but, you know, that's the gross cost, because the employee's paying for a portion of that.
Mhm.
It's coming, you know, our cost is
Until
not-
they meet their deductible.
Yeah.
What's an individual, do you know around, is it 4?
About,
Well,
for family,
The,
For families
yeah,
four?
the teachers are at 4,500. Most of our other employees are at 4,000.
That's for a family?
The family coverage.
Wow.
So
They call that high deductible.
So here's the problem with this though.
But, you know.
Now, I know, I'm just used to
No,
the
no, no,
private
no.
sector where
What I was gonna
a high
say
deductible
is,
is
you know, high
9,000.
deductible, if you look at, and I think it's important to explain that, you know, we're not private sector, right?
Oh, I know, yeah,
We're municipal sector.
Right.
And so when we negotiate contracts, and we just did this with the teachers,
Mhm.
you know, our teachers are 4,500, you know, our attorney said, yeah, well, you're above the market,
Mhm.
you know, because it's still at 2,000, 4,000 for most of the school districts, and, you know,
I know,
Whether or not
I'm
have-
not saying anything, I'm just saying, you know, when I think of being in the private sector, and we say high deductible is 9,000, 10,000, 12,000, and then the high deductible of this is 4,000 or 5,000.
Here's the problem with the scenario.
I hear you.
I know, yeah.
Vince, here's the problem with the scenario. If we're self-insuring for this, and Cigna or the provider has no downside in approving requests that come through, who's protecting us? Because I just had a drug that was prescribed by my doctor for me, denied today, because it was too expensive and there's less expensive drugs. That happens regularly in the industry. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's what's happening to almost everybody out there. They're having to fight to get the drugs that they might prefer. Who's fighting for us? Because Cigna's not fighting for us because we're paying for it.
Well, I
So
think-
that's-
I think-
Sure they do.
I think your
You know,
question, I think to Don's question, and maybe you know the answer, is with a self-insured policy like we have, does Cigna provide utilization management where they will go through a prior authorization process and oftentimes will say, your doctor prescribed this high-cost drug, there is a generic alternative, we want you to try this first, is that your question?
Well, my question is they could go through all that, but they don't really care in the end because it's not their money.
Well,
They're gonna
that's,
care more when it's their money than it's our money.
John, that's.
is there a
That's
utilization
not, that's not an
management?
accurate statement, because, you know, first of all, we do have a broker. We do look at trends, we do look at cost versus other municipal plans.
But
So
what's
I
the
don't think it's-
incentive for them to be more aggressive on
Their
the?
incentive is to keep us as a client, John.
You know what?
Are
That's
there-
not the same incentive as having money in your pocket. I disagree with the whole approach.
Well,
And I
what
think
is
it's,
the covered benefits? Because to your point, like, I think maybe what the assumption is because we're self-paid, if the doctor says you need it, then go for it. There's no barriers, so potentially cosmetic surgeries or something along the lines, if the doctor says you should have this, then you should have this. What kind of barriers or parameters are there on the self-insured policies? Are they similar to private insurance? Is there utilization management? I'm sure the benefits have limitations. Like I can give you an example, my daughter has braces, we have $600 coverage and that's it, that's all you get. So are those parameters in place for this coverage?
Yes, they are, and, you know, what I would suggest, because this is a topic that, you know, obviously an expensive topic, you know, maybe it's time we have an insurance committee or a working group. We could bring Cigna, we could bring our broker in, and they could make a presentation so you can understand that, yeah, there is management, there is cost control. I shared the GLP one, by the way, you know, cost control it's not limited to GLP-1. In fact, those are not even the most expensive drugs that we see. I mean, some of the, you know, Humira as an example, very expensive, and there are controls so that if it's prescribed and it's not prescribed to treat what the doctor has prescribed it for, that is challenging.
So I'd be curious to see, you know, how many prescription drugs have been denied by Cigna for our teachers and what they were versus, you know, because if you said they do that, I would just be curious to see how many have been denied. Because like John said, I know, my wife has been denied many times on certain drugs, And, I mean, there are times I've had to go to the insurance commission to fight it. And it's not fun, but you have to do those things sometimes. But I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of what John is saying, you know, are they, have they denied certain ones, and for what reasons have they denied them? If, it's not necessarily a generic form. Sometimes there's just, no, we think, you know, we only will cover it for this, you know? And you don't have that, even though we know it works for that, what you have, we will only cover it if you have this illness, and that's what happens. So I'd appreciate it, like, if maybe, you know, after the budget season, we can meet with them, and maybe they can explain it a little better to us.
Is it too late to impact the budget for the fiscal year coming up to do that, or is it not too late?
Well, because we're self-funded, arguably, it's never too late, right? We're paying, anytime you make a change, and look, we're appropriating funds on an assumption of the way claims are gonna proceed over the year. But because we are not paying a fully insured premium to Cigna, where they're cutting and taking profit off the top of everything else, there's no set amount, right? So if the claims improve 6 months through the year, that's added surplus in the medical reserve fund. So arguably, there's no bad time to take that effort on in earnest. It doesn't mean between now and when we adopt this budget, that I don't think either of us would be comfortable making a significant medical benefits additional adjustment on an assumption we're gonna get some sort of savings that we have no real dollars around right now. I don't think you can do that, but I think if we have a surplus at the end of the year, we've paid in claims versus what we put in, that helps the fund. It could help the operating budget, depends on how much we decided.
I mean, it's a $16 million item in the Board of Education.
Yeah.
It's really not right that we don't have more knowledge other than that we have about this, that we've heard, that it's not in a committee format, et cetera. I mean, everything in this town is in a committee format where people are looking at it, looking at alternatives and options. And I'm not suggesting Vince has done anything wrong, but I'm just saying, it's so expensive, shouldn't we have more eyes on it, because we're paying for it, and we should know whether or not there's opportunities to save. It's a big responsibility for you to take on, and you're trusting experts that walk in the room with you, and I'm sure, I mean, like I said, in my private business, we used Cigna for many, many years. They were a very, very good provider. But we also, you know, private sector, we made adjustments every year. We asked our employees to take on more, because we didn't have bargaining agreements. We asked them to take on more. We changed things around so we can control as the medical expenses just became more and more difficult. We controlled them through a process. You can't control a lot of things because there's certain things that the employees have certain agreements on. So we need to look at everything else. It's just too big an item for us not to be evaluating it in greater detail with more heads in the room. And the town is using the same exact process. Is
Well,
that
we share the responsibility, the fact that our plans, you know, are all combined under Cigna in this case, does help us. You know, at the end of the day, and, you know, I'm looking at this from the point of view, the claims that we have, whether you have it with Cigna or Anthem or some other third party, you know, assuming the claims are being processed properly, claims are going to be the claims no matter which provider. You know, you may save on fees, but, you know, our annual fees combined to Cigna are about $300,000 per year. So, you know, really the only items you can affect would be your claims, the amount employees are paying in, and then, you know, any other savings you could find by trying to be creative. So, I mean, I know I do spend a lot of time shepherding over this, but if, you know, I certainly wouldn't have any objection to a committee and, you know, hear it, you know, directly from Cigna, and, you know, if we need to go to bid.
Yeah, I mean, is this something Personnel Committee already does then when they're negotiating contracts?
Well,
Because that's part of the negotiation.
More with the entire, on the town side at least, more with the entire council when we have more normal negotiations. Certainly it's always a topic. Again,
which I know this past year was not necessarily normal.
We didn't have everything on the
Right.
table in a one-year format for some of the unions, but certainly in every other year, every other negotiation prep we've done, we've brought the consultant in for the strategy sessions, the executive session, and we go through all those. And I know we didn't touch on it, but I think Ben did in the email, but, you know, the stop loss has been, and every year when it comes to that component, it is complicated, to John's point, it's a very complicated world.
Right, and I'm guessing my Board of Ed, the same, when they're negotiating, they just negotiate with the teachers, this was probably part of those negotiations. Not to say that we shouldn't have someone still come in to provide the rest of us with this kind of information, so we're all aware,
And there has to
but-
be a longer term strategy, I think, a little
Right.
bit more in the municipal sector, because as Ed was alluding to, with binding arbitration awards, you're only gonna be able to move so far out of what is the norm for 169 towns in the state before you're not gonna prevail at an arbitration if it came to that. So you have to be, it's designed that way, it's designed to make slower change, not annual, June 15, June 30, hey, employees, we're changing carriers this year, this is why, and if you don't like it, tough luck, it's not designed that way.
I can remember, Sean, not too long ago, we looked at an IT program for the town, and we had a committee that included some townspeople who had expertise in that area, and they made recommendations, et cetera. I can't remember what the committee was actually called, Peter, you might recall.
The technology study group?
Technology study group, something like that, I mean, and they,
You were on that, right?
Yeah.
and I think we
Still
had.
is.
Yeah.
Is it still an active group? Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know we had one individual, I remember, who had expertise in the industry and was part of that group, I'm sure that person brought value. And I'd love to see us do something like that. I am a little uncomfortable with some of the, you know, like I said, everybody in industry needs to have risk. And I think Cigna's arrangement with us puts them in a very, very comfortable position where they have very limited risk. And granted, risk might only be that they lose us as a client, but they have that I could see, they have no skin in the game other than the relationship. They don't have anything to lose. And they know, they have enough to know that over a certain amount of money, there's really very little risk in the industry, so they're okay with that. So they don't have anything, they have no skin in the game. So why should they be pushing back? We have no one pushing back for us at this point.
There's no
It goes-
performance aspect of the contract?
Well, I guess what I would say that first though, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about this at the last council meeting. One thing to remember, and again, this can be done on a more regular basis, it was only in 2023 that we were asked by the council to compare our fully insured model to our self-funded model to a fully insured model. So at least in the quotes we received when we put that out, the cost of them owning that risk was the premium was going to be $3 million higher than we're paying now. So that's maybe their trade-off there, and that's what I'm not saying it answers the question. I think it's a completely valid point, but they certainly weren't prepared to offer us a lower net cost than we were already paying in claims plus administrative fee. They were actually $3 million higher if they owned all that risk. So that's part of the
But
analysis.
maybe another carrier would have, and maybe someone who would take on the prescription and say, you know what, I can manage this prescription process in my way. But now, I don't want to hurt our employees. I mean, I don't want it to be, because I hate it when it happens to me, and everybody does. But that's what's happening out there. I mean, I don't want the townspeople to be taking on.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And again, just to clear up any misconception, I know when it came to braces as a parent of a 13-year-old, I planned to pay zero for braces. I paid 100% of braces. My daughter just had off last year. So I just for the record, there's no of those sort of platinum benefits.
You know, I think that's an important thing that you look at, you know, and we do have our broker that's what the broker's job is to make sure that, you know, we're not outside of norms. Now, there's no way to foolproof, you know, what Cigna's doing, but they do a responsible job. The other comparison, and I know we talked about this, is if you look at the state partnership plan, you know, for family coverage, it's $10,000 more than where we are. So, is it a better plan? Yeah, a bit better, but it's $10,000. That's another third more than we're paying. And I can tell you anecdotally, you know, I think that where we are in terms of our total cost for each of the plans, single, two-family, and two-person and family coverage, we're pretty good comparatively if you just look at, you know, what our total coverage costs are. Again, not to say we shouldn't look at it,
No,
John, but-
I agree, but I won't point to the state, because then you go to the federal, the higher up you go, the less efficient things seem to get.
Well,
So, I mean, I think we have an ability, we're at a nice stage here that we can be as efficient as, we have size, but we have the ability to manage it at a personal level.
There's a
So-
lot of towns, though, that their cheapest alternative right now is moving to the state
Yeah.
plan. So I think that just tells us that we're not even close to having to make that decision, because we're well under those. And I know of two towns that are, you know, involved with CT Prime, that are likely moving to the state plan, because their claims, you know, not their stop loss,
Yeah.
just their medical claims are that much higher than where we are.
Listen, I know it's much more complicated than I understand, but I think it's a massive number, and I'd like us to at least be sure, be more sure.
Anything else?
Just a quick, so at this point, from what we're looking at, we're not looking at a number significantly or if at all more than the 250 that's already sort of floating out there.
That's,
Unless we as a group decide something else.
Right.
I mean, it hasn't offered us anything, but that doesn't.
I would have to talk to my sales manager before I could come up with anything else. That's up to Dr. Sullivan and the board, but, yeah, and I recognize that you have to make.
yeah, and
Whatever
any,
budget you approve goes back, you know, whatever is appropriated goes back to the board for the board to decide, you know, how it's allocated.
Right.
and any final number we decide tonight, you know, could be a combination of rollover or cuts to current, you know, current line items.
Yeah, because we're not gonna tell you what to roll over and what to cut, that's.
Yeah, that's up to them.
But we know
Yeah.
what those line items are not going to be.
Yeah. From the sheet that Dr. Sullivan gave us the other day. Okay, Sean.
Thanks, Vin, for your closer
Thank you,
explanation.
Vin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not leaving yet, I want to see the rest of it. At least for a little while.
You wanna see Sean under.
Yeah, come sit next to me.
You got big shoulders, Sean.
Yeah, right. Where would you like to start?
So just, yeah, from where we were and where we are.
So, all right, so updates, I'll start with, again, this is actually modified, the mill rate is still at the 29.87, I'll explain why as we go through each of these and what the assumptions that are included, and any further discussions along additional assumptions you'd like to see either validated through the spreadsheet or discussed as we go along. Like we normally do. I'll start on the expenditure side. I will kind of breeze through the first 10 here. I know it jumps from 10 to 12. We have talked about these previously. Medical insurance reserve usage on the town, reducing the pool subsidy, that's an increase in pool fee revenues through fee increases as discussed on Thursday night of $100,000, cutting the beautification budget by $15,000 for the annual special project and some from their annual maintenance line. Eliminating or finding a sponsor for the Fall Festival fireworks. Public Safety Commission budget request. OPEB trust usage for, again, the medical benefits trust line on the town side. Not including the $5 million excess coverage for liability insurance. Profit sharing, a piece of the profit sharing assumption going up as we received $80,000 this year. That's an increase of 30 to a total of $50,000 assumed next year. Opioid funds to pay half of the substance abuse counselor's salary, and that hazard mitigation cleanup line, $2,600. On Thursday night, we discussed, in addition to these, although yes, remember initially you had to break out the fireworks piece of it, there was the 24,614 net changes to recreation. I did not break each of those out here. That's the total that we discussed on Thursday night. Also on Thursday night, we discussed a slight increase to the arts place supplies budget, but in conjunction with that was a $5,000 increase to revenue for the arts place to cover the supplies CTAS request that Joanne presented. And then for now, this Chestercott one is just a slight adjustment as we got the formal number from them last month. Well, not a formal, at least an indication that the per capita rate would stay flat. However, they used the Department of Health's calculation for Cheshire's population, and it was an increase of, at least from year over year, what they used last year, 2,296, to a population of 29,200. So that causes an increase, sorry, it's not of that, it's that times 10, it's less than that, so it's a 200-person increase, because it's about a $10, $11 per capita rate.
Now, is that population, that does not include prison population?
It's the DPH calculated, what I don't believe it does, 29,200, it's whatever they've used from there.
So I know the state took it out of,
In some calculations, and it's not in others, census versus American Community Survey, I think, but yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know, I mean, do they serve the prison? Chestercott? No.
Not really, not in any way that I can think of.
We're looking at the budget tomorrow, though, and they're proposing a $10, 15%.
Right, so you had indicated that, so I wrote that here, that there may be consideration tomorrow night of another dollar decrease, which would be, again, a savings of $29,200 in addition. So I've put that to the side here. First, I wanted to show the increase of 2296, just because that's flat, that's population only driven. If it stayed at 1115, but if you'd like to see that reduced by a further 29, I just would plug that in there.
And that's gonna be voted on tomorrow?
The review is tomorrow, I think we vote on at the end of the month, but I don't suspect it'll change. We'll see.
And Sean, the 5,000 that the adjustment from our space is in the,
Yeah, so
where's that number?
when we get,
That's in the revenue
that
side,
would be increasing their
because it's an
expenditure.
increase of revenue from
So it's,
175 to 180.
okay,
So it'll show up in a different spot.
it's in a different spot.
It is in the revenue, right, and it's rolled up, it's on another
You have
spreadsheet.
revenue in this one too, so.
We do, yep, and so that's why this number here is actually 5,000 more than what we had.
It's in, okay, in that revenue, it's not in, just out of curiosity, why'd you put it in that number as opposed to the other numbers you're looking at right now?
Here,
No, the numbers are broken.
Because
broken down for-
it's money coming in rather than money going out. That's just the expenditure sheet.
But no, because you have 100,000 negative on the,
yeah, so that one is, remember, that's a confusing one, that is a subsidy.
That's
Because
an
we are short in
expenditure.
the,
I thought that was a revenue, increased revenue.
so, it's a revenue to the pool, it's
Yeah.
admittedly confusing. Because the pool doesn't cover its expenses by $500,000, right? So, round numbers, the pool costs us 1.3 million to
Oh, I
run.
see, so it's.
It generates
it's still not-
800,000.
It's still not a positive.
It's
okay.
500, if they raise fees by 100, we have to subsidize 100,000 less.
All right, I'm
So
sorry.
it's a cut to expenditures, yes, but otherwise, these are all,
It doesn't matter, I was just curious why it's
no,
one place.
that's an expenditure, it's a revenue that's actually.
did we change that from the other night? Because I know when we were talking about the out-of-town uses and stuff like that?
I have no additional proposal. My understanding is, I think on Tuesday, John, I know, and Sheila, Dr. Duffy and others, I think are getting together to kind of map out. I think as we had explained, the council would be approving a goal of $100,000. And they're charging them with coming up with what they
Coming up
reasonably
with how
think
they're
will be
gonna
a
do
fee
it.
structure.
Yeah, well, I gotta say, I'm extremely disappointed that it's gone that many years without any change, especially when Sheila's telling us how much chlorine has gone up dramatically. And I would ask that, you know, John and the Park and Rec look at their fees every year on a yearly basis, just to see where it's at, because to go that many years without a change while all their expenses have increased dramatically, I think is unfair to the taxpayers here too. And I think if they should really put a substantial increase on the out-of-town users. Because like Mr. Dart said the other night, I mean, the taxpayers are taking the burden of this because we're still subsidizing it, so.
She did clarify, she did, that there were some increases, but to different categories.
Not,
It
yeah,
was
but not
to-
in many years for that.
Well, 2 years ago, we did
The-
all the meets.
we did the
All
meets.
That was the goals, yeah, but I
Yeah.
think on
And then-
passes,
No.
there had not been an adjustment.
The
I think
daily
she said.
Since
passes.
'08?
It was daily and for annual passes. and
Yeah,
stuff.
the meets, I knew that I remember when the meets went up, but yeah.
And remember, there were collapses and then there was the shutdown for COVID. So there were some reasons that they held probably for some, but it's not to say, again, I don't want to speak for Sheila, but certainly And I agree, I personally agree that we should be increasing, and certainly starting, I think, not just $1 on each or anything, but something that's more significant on the out of town, is particularly this year, totally agree with that. But it, again, isn't to say that it isn't reviewed each year, they just would not suggest any
Right.
increases. The
Think
market
over the
is where the market is.
Over the last 6 years, we've kind of taken the approach that, they pay taxes, we don't want to nickel and dime them for every fee, so that's,
Well, we're talking about the out of town people, who over 3,000 out of towners
yeah,
what the passes.
that was eye-opening to see how.
Yeah, well, I know, I was shocked. I didn't realize that it was 3 to 1, more out of towners.
On the day passes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, who do come and then go to our restaurants and go to our businesses when they're
Right.
here, so
Yeah, I don't care about that, I care about,
as a small
Well,
business owner, I
yeah,
kind of think you would, but.
well, Fiona, I do care about that, but I also care about the people coming in and using our pool, and while so do the people who live here, they also utilize the small businesses
No,
too.
I visit parks in other towns,
Yeah.
I go to Sleeping Giant, and I go to Hamden, I go to Waterbury, I think.
The bottom line is we're losing money on it, so we have to make some money on it.
I agree, I would though propose that we do, an increase across the board. And I'm not so sure if this 100,000 reflects just the $20 that was kind of bumped up for every charge, but I would propose potentially a 10% increase across the board, as well as birthday party fees should be exponentially higher. If you price out any other birthday party in town, they typically start at least $300. So we have, even a bump up to $190 is too low. Also, I would argue that because we have so many out-of-towners coming to Cheshire because the pool is so great, if they didn't come, we would be even in greater deficit. So I'm grateful that they do,
Yeah.
and so I would like to see the fee increase across the board for all of the charges.
So maybe we increase that by another 50,000.
Which would get you above 100,000, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's what, I can't answer that question right now definitively. I know that the email that I sent around from Sheila, I believe the total at the bottom of that was an increase of about, is it $57,000 or $67,000 for all of those fee adjustments?
It was
Right.
a $20 charge for every single one, just a
Right,
flat
no,
rate
but it's,
$20.
right, but it's, all of these rolled up come to 620,000.
Right.
Previously, it's 570, so it's 50,000 increase. So you'd have to do, well, in that case, $2 for every one flat fee. You'd have to double everything you did, go up 40 on everything, then you went up 20, and go up 2 for every one, you went up 1, and you'd be at 100,000, which is what we have now. Now,
Which is
again, I
what
think
we've
we're
asked them
asking,
to do.
I don't think we have to settle that here at this table.
Right,
I would
right.
suggest the rec commission is in a good position, and I would also like to have the department head and the division head there to inform that conversation. But conceptually, I think those numbers certainly are well within reason of consideration, and whatever you're comfortable with in that number 2 line that you want, if you want to get more aggressive with the goal.
These are
That's
in
your-
addition to the 463 number where we gave John, that you were saying you wanted to get to
Yeah, it is,
for revenues.
yeah, right, it's unrelated to Park and Rec revenues.
Okay.
But it is not, I will say, from at least the initial budget presented by, expenditure budget by the pool, it was generating a required subsidy of $535,000 or $39,000. In my town manager adjustments, I had already asked them to find $30,000, just to be clear, because I felt 540 was a huge subsidy. I got it down to 500, and then knowing we'd have this conversation, we're proposing lowering that further to 400. So we can come back to that one if we want, just to quickly put some more color around the other requests that I was asked to go make. I know I was gonna find about 165,000, some of these we already assumed we would include, that I've gone beyond, because you'll see a few new items here. The total of all these in gray here is actually now 231. And so what I would suggest from these cuts is we have a line in our IT budget of computer workstations and accessories that I think is currently been lowered down to 30,000. I think this would lower it to 20, it might be 40 to 30, either way, it's a $10,000 reduction. Added on here the annual volunteer holiday reception as a request that I received to consider. That's the annual December reception that we've done the last couple of years at Byron Rondo. those. The staffing positions, cutting, as I mentioned, I would be I've frozen my part-time positions, and these are ones that I would suggest, or I would be offering as permanent cuts throughout the next fiscal year. One is cutting one senior library associate position that is currently vacant. That's a savings of $62,482. I will just advise on that one. I had a conversation with Sandy Hernandez earlier this afternoon, looking over where our overtime is currently. This senior library associate position is one of the ones that's in the tech division there. We're helping with a lot of technology needs, both outreach, senior center, also some of the digitization services and things that we have in the library that have been very well received, but again, are not core mission critical, maybe per se, in a very difficult budget year. That said, it is also a position, though, that is 35 hours of a body that can work the desks. And unfortunately, as we've been short that position, we've been having to pay overtime, the way the contract works, to staff Saturday hours from 9 to 5. As Sandy and I were running the numbers this afternoon, there is some concern that when we cut this position, just be aware, we may have to reduce our Saturday hours by about half. So we may only be open 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. If that's the way the coverage breaks out, just remember the library doesn't operate on a 35-hour a week. They're closer to 55 or 57 hours. And 57. And so that is just, again, I think it's a reasonable consideration in a difficult budget year. I just don't want anyone to be surprised if we do end up having to cut the Saturday hours by maybe 3 or 4 hours to what we're currently on.
And that's, you're saying that's because someone, you lose a person to the front desk?
It's, right, well, that position's vacant and frozen now, and so we're experiencing the only alternative to that, and it just doesn't become it doesn't make any sense, is when we have those vacancies, when the Saturday hours are open, they have to be offered first to the existing staff under the union contract. So the only option, if you don't have somebody you can schedule for it, is you have to have somebody scheduled on overtime to staff Saturday. And I personally just don't think it would make sense to staff additional Saturday library hours doing overtime. We're paying time and a half to have the library open 8 hours instead of 4, or whatever the case may be. So I would suggest, in order to save that overtime expense, otherwise you're eating into the savings by paying somebody overtime to offset it. Why wouldn't we just simply close the library?
How many library associates do we have, Sean?
24.
How many LT?
Library associates or
Well,
library?
there's 24 total employees.
Those are not, yeah, those aren't all libraries.
No, there's 1, 2, 3,
Library, senior library associates?
four senior library associates.
Right, so we would have
And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 librarians.
Yep. And then senior library.
And every time, all the time the library's open, there's always a senior associate there?
Yeah, I know we didn't have a library presentation this year,
Yeah,
but,
we didn't,
and
that's
I
right.
wouldn't want to step, they can speak to it a little more artfully than I probably can. But there is a minimum staffing, so to kind of use a police term, when it comes to operating the building. We have to have somebody, you can't just run the entire library with one person at one desk. So you do have to have a minimum of a certain number of librarians on staff there. One at reference, one at circulation, one at, and it's a multi-level library. You can't, so the answer is, the reason you see, 12 or so total librarians between those with a master's degree in MLS, that you have to have there and available to staff each of those desks to assist patrons. You need that number to operate the 57 hours a week we're open now. And what I'm just suggesting, if we make this cut, is that it might be a tipping point where you just can't offer all of those hours. If we drop to 53 hours, it's just.
Do they have a counter on people coming in and going out?
They do.
So can you find out how many would normally go in a Saturday afternoon?
Oh, easily, yeah, that's a number.
I mean, that way you could kind of get an idea of, okay, well, it might not make sense if there's 10 people going in and you're paying time and a half for somebody there.
Yeah, I know it's not 10, I know Saturdays, I mean, that's.
I've never been there on
Yeah,
Saturday.
well, when the kids were young, we were there every Saturday, and we liked it when they were open on the Sundays, because then in the winter time especially, you could go on a Sunday.
Yeah, Sundays used to be, we haven't been open since Sundays since COVID, so we haven't
Yeah,
Sunday
so, I
hours
mean,
since
we've already
COVID.
lost that in this town, but that was a place to go on the weekends with the kids. So losing that's half a Saturday when we are already not open on Sundays still, I'm concerned about that.
Well, if we can get the count, like, I'd like to maybe get a count around Bailey and.
I'll have Andrew just kind of jot down some of these questions so we can.
I think that would help us understand, that, you know, it sounds like a lot of people, but I mean, depending on how many people are coming in and using the library, you know, it probably makes sense, because I know when Beth came in, she kind of streamlined it pretty well. I mean,
I will say.
at one point, we had, what, a lot more, 24
Yes.
employees.
We had two, yep, we cut both from administrator positions and from frontline librarian positions.
Right.
I will say, if you dust off a budget book, I've got a whole in my office, you can see them,
Right.
all the way dating back, up the shelf there. But if you look at last year, I think I said this in last year's budget presentation. Last year was the first year we crossed over where we were when I started here in 2017. So the library budget has actually been flat for 7 years. Cutting this position will probably bring that, I didn't do the numbers, but I bet it brings it back to the 2017, 2018. So we've done a lot, and we've made great strides. I would point out, we have wonderful employees, and yes, credit, I think, to Beth for sure, for very strategically replacing or not replacing positions over time, and I think making our library better and better, and actually doing it at the same cost that she was handed when she started, so.
Sean, quick question on this, and obviously, you know, that may be a good point that Fiona's bringing is on Saturdays. Question, is it possible that, you know, for example, we figure out a different day that maybe the library isn't as utilized, maybe like a Friday from like, you know, Friday evenings or something like that, you know, different.
Closes at 5 on Friday, so it's not open.
Okay, so that, right, okay, so that,
it's
so,
not down.
I'm sorry, is there another opportunity to cut or reduce
course.
hours somewhere, so that if you wanted to keep those Saturday afternoons, we still get to the same number of hours, but now we're not.
Yeah, so I think that's a question I would certainly want to have the
The
library
same
director
meeting.
weigh in on, and also the library board, you know, certainly want to comment on maybe some of their thoughts on that. And we're always very data driven when it comes to that, so I think looking at where the lean times are. Obviously, there are some, if the lean time is the middle of the day on a Tuesday, it's not like, you know, close it, you open in the morning and then close it, I mean, there are some
Restaurant.
practical considerations.
We're closed from 10:30 until 3:30.
But, yeah, but in all seriousness, I mean, it's a very tough budget year. Everyone knows that, Sandy knows that, our staff knows that. We're doing everything we can, and we'll look at what we are approved to offer. Yeah. So, I mean, so scheduling considerations can again happen, unless that's an inhibitor to you approving this cut. I would suggest we go ahead with the cut and then work around it when it comes to scheduling over the next few weeks to months time. Moving on, a few of these are, so the next item is in our tax office. We have an assistant revenue collector vacant position now. I'm suggesting replacing that with a senior revenue associate position. It's just a lower grade position in the same union. And also not starting that position until October 1st. I worked with our tax collector on this. She doesn't want to do it in July and August are such crazy times in there anyway. It's not a great time to bring somebody on. That position is currently vacant. It's been vacant for a number of months right now. And so we are, again, given the budget considerations, I would be suggesting a reduction in the classification of the job title there, and associated reduction for that is about $35,000, and then delaying that start by October 1st is like another $11,000, bringing the total to $46,000. Again, I'm trying to find cuts that I think will affect service delivery the least. All of them have some impacts. These are not positions that are extraneous in any way, but these are ones that I think that we can do without outreach, and that I think if we have to go too much further, we'll have to have some other conversations about service reductions. We've already talked about the police records clerk position in the PD. I think it was our first budget workshop. So that part-time position is $23,868. There's an accounts payable, sorry, Jim. Accounts payable part-time position. That is a reduction of about $42,000. But in order to account for some of that shifting work, the suggestion here would be an increase of 5 hours to the accounts payable coordinator in Jim's office in this department. The net savings is $32,780 off of that. We have, I believe, 10 DPW park maintainer seasonal employees budgeted. Each one is about a little over $7,800. We have 10 in some years we're not able to get all 10 filled. Kids back from college don't all come running for those jobs maybe like they used to, but we do encourage folks to, but they are our best bang for the buck, I will say, dollar for dollar for the amount of work you're getting at a lower cost. It kind of pains me to make this cut, but again, I'm trying to spread the effect as minimally as possible, so
What do they tend to do, what work do they actually tend to do?
Cutting the lawns.
during growing season, you'll see them out
Yeah.
everywhere, doing all the Board of Ed sports fields in the summer, when they're not maintaining them, they're dragging them, helping to mow them. They're doing a lot of mowing, a lot of weed whacking, a lot of working around town buildings during the height of the growing season. And it helps cover, because remember, our public works employees are limited or prevented from taking any vacations throughout winter. And so when they are taking their entitled time off, a week here, a week there, it's in the spring or in the summer. And as soon as we get these guys in, they're able, and we're actually grateful we have this arrangement, obviously through our union contract, it's important to be able to have these guys at a pretty low cost. They're just above minimum wage, or if not at minimum wage.
So they mow the lawns of the schools in the summer, the Board of Ed
Sports
handles it,
fields.
the rest?
The sports
No,
fields.
well, we mow, they.
I'm sorry, we line and drag and, yeah, that's right, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so
we
you
prep
guys
them for
mow,
sports.
okay.
Yeah,
You're right,
we
they're
mow
still
all the-
mowing the outfields.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
yeah, I shouldn't say mow.
All right.
It's dragging, lining, and setting up the infields.
Right. Okay.
Will they do that on the weekend as well?
I said they cut.
You said
lawns.
Mel?
Yeah, I said they cut.
I think I might have said that.
Do they
I was-
work on the weekend or do they work Monday through Friday?
They are almost exclusively Monday through Friday. You might see them at the summer concerts sometimes assisting. We have, Bartlett Beats. Of course, it's Friday night, so it's
There was a concern from a constituent that they saw somebody mowing the lawn on the
Sundays.
weekend, and so
Sundays,
they
yeah.
assumed it was for overtime pay.
no.
That would be Board of Ed though,
I,
right?
I'm
If
not
they
so
mow the
sure.
lawn,
on a Sunday,
Do people ever cut lawns on Sundays?
For
Saturdays?
overtime.
The only time we would have people come in on the Saturdays if it's been very rainy and you just can't.
yeah,
get
I was
to
gonna
it,
say
but
the same. If we really, if
Generally,
there's,
no, we
yeah.
don't do that on the weekends.
if for some reason Friday was,
Overtime.
and Thursday were rainy, even at MAC or something, and there was a series of baseball games on Saturday, it's possible someone could do a last minute one. But I would say, the only other thing that we just wanna clarify with whoever made it, are they sure it was a town or Board of Ed employee?
No, they just saw
Because, yeah.
somebody mowing.
it was Vin.
Turns out.
Depends on where it was, and then we do have some buildings now, Town Hall's one, that we actually contract out some, I think, maybe does some of the work around here, so it's possible they could have done something on a Saturday, Sunday, but that's a contractor we're paying to do the work that used to have a full-time employee that did all of the grounds, that was eliminated 6 or 7 years ago,
Not for overtime.
and not for, in that case, it would be a contractor.
Yep, thank you.
Do you know if they were fully staffed last year with the maintainers, the kids?
I would have to check, but I don't believe so. I think we had 10, I think we've got 7 to 8. They don't all stay the same amount of
Yeah.
time. Some kids come
Yeah,
home
there's an
early.
overlap or
Right,
whatever.
and some are, and I say kids, I mean, they're not all necessarily
Right.
college kids. Some could be a year or two out of college.
Yeah,
Maybe they can start, there are dates in the union contract that say when
they
it
could
gets
start.
started. But it's broad, it's like May through September or something like that. Don't quote me, but it's enough that those home only for 10 weeks, maybe you're only a small slice of it, but it's not surprising for me to see a PAF or a seasonal worker come through on my desk in May. And then the last two are just some cleanup items. I have various assumptions, with respect to non-union pay increases and any unsettled collective bargaining agreements that are not close to settling, where I had an assumption generally about 3% in the budget when we plan the budget, so I'm recommending a reduction of that to 2.75%. It's a bit of a moving target, it's not necessarily what everyone's gonna get. If they're non-union, those are based on performance and other things. And obviously assumptions when it comes to negotiating contracts are gonna be with whatever the council ends up approving or when any final collective bargaining agreement is approved. But again, I'm just trying to shake out all the sofa cushions here. That generates about $20,000 of savings. And lastly, in part because of some of the position adjustments above, but also just kind of getting a little more aggressive with our 401, 457 Social Security contribution assumptions, that's about $15,000. So those are the suggested additional edits that I had, again, here summing to 231. So happy to come back to any of those, or we can do a quick just reminder where we are if that's okay with the Board of Ed. This was the number that was last discussed around the table on Tuesday. Here's the two, I colored it yellow because again, it was a little up in the air. You're correct that I think on Friday, Dr. Solon sent around, it was sort of an if-then about starting replacement
Curriculum KD.
curriculum coordinator, that he would be, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but, you know, he put 250,000,
Willing to,
yeah,
yeah.
250,000 on the proverbial table. So I have that here in terms of just calculating where that generates. And then we talked about the additional debt service bond premium use and capital non-recurring still at the 500,000. So a grand total of expenditure adjustments of 3.78 million. The revenues, which again, I'll just quickly touch on, not a lot of change here. I mentioned that in this number is the $5,000 for departmental revenue assumptions. And the only other new one, which I bolded, well, there's two new ones, I can't remember if this one was on the prior. There's a small Board of Assessment Appeals adjustment that has to be made after they've completed their work. That's prior to what I have when I presented the budget. But then this last one, we just want to, this is kind of a recent problem. We've started with such high mill rates that I have proposed over the last couple of years. I think I mentioned this in the very first workshop too. Remember, there are other mill rate sensitive items in the budget. There's only about 3 or 4. But as we are lowering the mill rate from 31.1 to 29 or somewhere in the middle, the amount we're going to get from the RWA for their pilot, the amount that we're going to have from certificates of completion, those are going to be slightly lower also the further we cut. There's a accumulating factor of that starts to move us off of the kind of
But
20.
a no-win situation.
Well, and
You're doing
yeah,
good things by
you
cutting.
still
and
are,
you
but
can't
it's sort of like you're
cut.
saving 95 cents on the dollar in some cases.
Yeah.
Or 98 cents really. But I just, the more we have got it down to that kind of mid-20 or high 29s right now, we're in the backup as we have to factor all of those revenue losses. They add up to about, and it's going to move every time we move this around. So, but it comes down to about $100,000 of a balancing figure that if you don't have it, you're really not generating the mill rate accurately within about 0.02 of a mill. Of course, that ends up mattering for, I don't want to be wrong, and then you see a number that's like, oh, it's different than I had. So if it wasn't for this 100,000, you know, this original work mill rate would be 20, with all those new adjustments and changes, which were again close to what we were projecting when we emailed this out on Thursday or on Friday, would be about 29.8, you know, I think 5 or something.
Hey, Sean, it's a small number. Did we factor in any income from the former Arts Place building, from the rent, the full rent that we would get when it's fitted up?
Former Arts Place,
Yeah, the old
From Chester?
Arts Place,
Chester
we,
County.
and we did in last year's budget, so I'm assuming it's in there.
yeah.
I
Rentals
mean,
and leasing
we're not
income.
getting rent right now, we're getting very little.
Getting
but at
1,000
some
a
point-
month now, and so, yeah, Jim.
I gotta believe if, yeah, miscellaneous revenue, the rental.
So it's in there somewhere, I didn't see it anywhere, so I didn't know it was in. It's not a big number anyway, but we've got so many small
We can
numbers up there.
Yeah.
I would confirm it,
Jim's
I'll make a note.
pretty good about that, and I think last year, I know we were careful to put it in, even I think at $1,000 as an assumption, so it may still be at that number, but we have to see.
How much are we at, I mean, if we go into next year, will it go up? I mean, when are they supposed to take possession? I mean, when are they,
That's
At this point, who knows?
yeah, I mean, they would have to, they'd have to do the work on the building that hasn't started, so it's not anytime soon.
gotcha, my question, then I guess the next question is, what happens if for some reason they choose not to go into that location and choose a different location? As, you know, if they don't go in there, and perhaps, you know, someone, you know, directs them to a different building in a different location, and they start renting in a different location, how does that affect, will that affect the budget?
We have a 10-year.
If
I
it's
mean, we
only
have
in
a
there
lease,
for
yeah, it would,
$12,000 a year, not much.
Right, but going
of
forward,
course, we
then
have certain rights under the lease, so I think, and we probably don't have that conversation in
Yeah.
executive session, but I think there would be certain strategic discussions around what breaking the lease would cost.
So, just going back to this, because the 29.87, you had all those suggested things, that's all included in there?
It is all included, remember, before I just had this placeholder, I think it said
Right.
165,
Okay.
175 that I was gonna find.
So that's
Just
all
based on-
included.
It is all included, because it rolls up to cuts of the Board of General Government side is 708,000. Board of Ed totals 271 with those, that addition, that 250. Here's the other number. So the total adjustments you've made are $5,059,000. And then again, this number in yellow we can change to target, and it simply tells you how far away you are. Right now, our target is the same as what's being calculated in blue. And so this is just, again, a rounding number of 16,000, but that tells you the remaining to cut to that target in yellow is 0 mils.
And you kept the fund balance of what we kept it the other day, right?
And no changes to any of the fund balance. And then just to summarize here, and I don't know why that's yellow, but we have,
Because it's probably yellow on the other side.
might be, yeah. I mean, this is what the overall expenditures would just come down. I think it's important to highlight. Again, a lot of moving parts this year, but with all those adjustments, the general government side of the budget, when you go to make those final appropriations, if this is exactly what we did, you'd be appropriating $40,800,000. That's an increase of 2.12% on the town side. The Board of Education, with all of these adjustments now, is currently at $3.94 million, a 4.4% increase. The debt service would be going up 25%, no mystery there. And then the other two slightly smaller adjustments, well, capital number is not a small adjustment. Reducing from the 1.1 million by 600,000 is a reduction of 54% to 20% respectively. Those would be what your approvals are actually done. We calculate the mill rate, of course, on the assumptions with revenue and everything else that are also set with the budget. But these would be your spending authorizations on the 5 main budget lines.
Just to clarify,
Correct.
capital non-recurring, that, we're hoping to actually maybe have a little more from closing out some old
Yep.
budgets, right?
That's correct, yeah. So I think that,
500,000 is just sort of the new money.
right, that's money going into the fund for which when you approve or authorize a capital non-recurring eligible project,
Right.
the money is there to pay for it. That determination, in the end, is really a funding determination, a financing one that the finance director will make, but he'll make it within the parameters of what you've assumed. And in this case, it would be an assumption that's lower. But yes, if we're able to close out a series of, and remember, there's a lot more on CIP than there is in CNR,
Yeah.
but if you're able to generate some dollars there, that would allow you, when we talk in May, to theoretically approve a few more CNR eligible items than you would otherwise. But these are your vehicles, these are your police cruisers, your computer
Technology.
technology replacements. It's largely, for 500,000, it's about all we're gonna be able to pay out of that.
I thought we were expecting maybe a couple 100,000 more
I would- I
from
think-
being able to close out some of those.
Couple hundred, I hope, maybe, at least maybe 100, I hope. Maybe more.
And Fiona, you mentioned there's funds potentially coming back in from the state now, which I
Well,
wasn't
we
aware
don't
of.
know, yeah, we don't know, and who knows if the legislature's gonna have a budget in time by
So-
June. I think,
so-
I mean, the talk right now there, I mean, you all may know more than I do, but is with the federal government, there's just so much instability and they don't know. And this may be one of those years where they don't pass a budget till well past
Yeah,
their
you may
projected time.
But
Recall
what
the
would the
reason
feds
that-
have to do with the state funding?
The ECS, so, I mean, that was,
But that's state.
that was for the ECS, so for the per pupil expenditure that we would get for the school.
Right.
So it was something that Jeff Solon said, maybe, he estimated.
That was the one we lost
211,000.
210,000.
Yeah, but that's state funding.
Yeah,
It's not federal, because federal, he said,
No, no,
we
no.
were locked
No.
in for the year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
No,
no, no, no,
it's
no,
state.
my point is the state's not making
we lost
decisions,
210,000 in the state
Right.
because our mill rate went down and our property values went up so high that we moved into a different category, and now we're being overfunded for ECS.
So that number's about $600,000 that we lost from, that's not ECS, that's pilot, right?
Pilot.
I'm talking about a lot of different
I'm
things.
sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
So pilot, just to be clear, pilot revenue went down about $580,000 because we moved from tier 2 to tier 3
Okay.
of eligibility for pilot reimbursement. Instead of getting a 40% reimbursement of the percentage calculations, it's like 30 or something like that. It was a
43 to 33.
43 to 33%, which sounds like a 10% reduction, but of course it's not. When you're getting reimbursed on 43% of a
Yeah.
number, that's actually a 28%.
Don't they realize that their property has increased in value? They
In
cut
the
us.
The
ECS,
problem is they think we are wealthier by their
Wealthier.
calculation because we moved over 200,000.
I say we start hitting with some blight fees.
So the pilot number is 580,000. What
ECS.
Fiona and
Oh, sorry.
John were just referencing was SB 1511.
Yes.
You'll remember I had it on here because I was hopeful the 210,000 might be something we could count on next year. It was clarified that's money, if it does pass, it would come in this year's operating fiscal 25. What it would do is increase this fund balance, all things considered, by about $200,000 because we have more excess revenue, if all other projections are exactly right. Just and then, right, the other piece we lost from the state was ECS. That was about $258,000.
I think we probably need to do a little bit more fund balance, right?
So we already did. So remember the last one I didn't get back. We talked about before. I have it at the bottom here. We did move from 1.25 to 2 million.
Oh, we did already all the way to 2?
Yes, that's the bulk of this revenue adjustment. So we are at 2 million. I was suggesting, and that is assumed here.
900.
The 125 that I budgeted, this additional
For
seven
next year.
So 11 point.
brings us down to 11.8, and I think I said at the last meeting, my concern with going any higher, we were 2.25 last year,
Yeah.
but we had a $4 million surplus to buy.
The state funding it up a little bit higher.
I'd be worried going to the rating agencies and saying we were doing
So this year.
I forgot,
Yep.
I think we were at 2, I think we were a little below 2.
Yeah.
In the revenue,
Oh, sorry. Yep.
do you have the,
No, that is the.
oh, the 175 for Arts Place is already in the budget, so that's not an adjustment, right?
Yeah, so if you go to
Next year,
our,
1,000 more.
you'll see it on, let me go through each of the department revenue projections that you all know and love.
The state was gonna
There you go.
fund
This was at least the document we were using to make the
Yep.
assumptions, right?
And there's-
Fine arts goes
Yep, it's probably 180. Okay.
that number at the very bottom
I think that
of
was
adjustments,
just-
488,500,
Yep.
is the sum of all of those adjustments.
Got it.
And when you go back to the mill rate, that's 48.
Perfect.
Sean, can we go back to your summary page, please, just for a second?
The one with all the different
Yeah.
classes.
So what's the average, at this number right here, what's the average?
714.
So on a house, right, on a house with 2 vehicles, it's 714. And it's mostly,
Where's that? I don't know.
sorry, right here
Right
in
under the yellow.
You see us? Okay,
the
so
center of
that's-
the edition, in orange now.
Oh, that's it right there, okay.
The cost of the new service.
You're talking about-
Yeah, no, I was talking about
Also
excess
waste.
costs, for special ed.
Yeah.
I think maybe we could boost that up a bit.
Sorry, just really quick.
To 9.
Vin, sorry guys, just a reminder that only microphones right next to you, so Crunch
Sorry.
won't be able to hear the rest of this, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
They'll hear you very clearly though, whatever you're
Yeah,
talking
whatever
about.
you were just talking about, it's loud and clear from the viewers.
We're all gonna go back and listen now.
Forget that, Jim.
Sorry, it was a consideration.
Yeah, we're just talking bets. that's all.
Yeah. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
The cost of the new bulky waste service at the transfer station is about $50,000, is that right in the book?
That sounds,
51 maybe?
Somewhere around there.
And we're doing that, how often?
Just every-
Once a month.
Oh, that's
Just once a month.
oh, it's once a month? Oh, is it every week?
I think that's right, I don't have it off the top, I won't be singled out here, but yeah,
I mean, as much as I would like to
It was-
keep that in there, adding new service this year is maybe not the right time.
But then there's no service
Just
for bulky
that.
waste, because there's no
Um,
pickup.
Sure.
As it is, it's limited to those people that have the ability to get it there, because
Sure.
most people don't have trucks, and if it's bulky, it's hard to move it if you have a car. So it's kind of a,
yes.
Picture of them, or something?
It, just making sure we're not doubling up on, it's an additional 9,000 in overtime, which is staffing. And then, just looking, I can confirm, but I think that's, it's either 40 or 50,000.
Can you, sorry, the percent increase, what's the percent increase that you ended up with right now?
Um,
Not that one, the, budget percent.
Yeah,
So at
total budget of
4.64.
4.64.
Okay, so last year, we had a total budget increase of 5.23, the year before that, we had a budget increase of 5.93, so we are, even with that debt service, well below the percentage of the prior 2 years.
Yeah, a few of the, yeah, that's correct. It was sort of supported obviously with a little bit of ARPA dollars off, well, in multiple ways. One of those years, we did budget bulky waste in the operating budget. Support that a little bit, $280,000, but yes, I mean, those are the adopted budget increases.
That would have been 23, 24.
That would have been, 2 years ago. Yep, 23, 24.
We can kind of just go through the exercise if we wanted to, if you had to reduce positions, let's say the town side, 5 positions. Well, that's like probably an average of about 65 grand or something per position.
Well, it very much depends on the position,
Sure.
of course. Yeah, but, I mean, if there was a target, I think if we were going a lot further, I mean, I think I would look at, you know, again, I'm not trying to pick on any departments, but we're kind of picking some non-public safety core, public safety departments to start. We've started discussing library hours a little bit. If you needed to take another position, you're probably, you know, again, just taking those library hours, more formalizing either the no Saturdays or something like that, and you're taking another position or two.
I guess what I wanted to see is
but-
just if we had a certain number, how much does that really reduce our? You know,
Sure, I can put that up on, I mean, if you said 5 positions, yeah, roughly, let's say on average of
so half-
60 to 70,000, I mean, you're probably, what's that, $300,000?
It's not even a tenth of a mil.
So
Yeah.
300, right, it would be one, close to one.
Which is how much per,
Yeah, so if we reduce the town side by a further, I don't know, I'm just using 300 as a, it would be 29.80.
Where does the town increase go to at that point then, Sean? From what to what?
1.37%.
That's all it is.
so it's a difference of.
Very much so.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, yeah, up the top.
714, a difference of 714 and 692, so it's,
Right,
doesn't get us very far.
that's correct.
So, before we do that though, let's go back to the 2987, sorry.
Okay.
'Cause I'm not prepared to go there yet. Let's just, how comfortable is everybody with where we are and where do we reasonably think we can get to without, you know, and,
I would really love to be below $700.
I know.
What was the
Well,
average?
and it's not a lot to get below 7.
What was the average increase last year?
It is,
4.
we just looked at 5 positions and that's all.
Yeah, the increase last year,
Yeah.
are you talking the percent budget increase?
Dollar amount.
For
Average tax.
the average to the the
700.
cost to the average taxpayer was.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of how much that is, 29.82 gets you to, in that case, 698, if you're looking at the average. And the distance you're away from that is down here in the middle, you're about $212,000 away from under 700, just as a thought example.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
The hand goes up in the back.
So do I hear a volunteer in the front?
So what Jim and I were just talking about, and I apologize if we messed up the microphone, but special ed excess cost. We had budgeted revenue of 900,000, that's what's in there right now. This year's revenue was 963, but now, I don't know if you remember all the discussion, Governor was willing to add
Yes.
$40 million.
Right.
And then we got from this, it wasn't finalized, back on April 3rd, but the school finance project sent out estimates that would get us to 1.1 million. That means our reimbursement would be 76%, and I thought we were capped at 72. But just you know, what I'm getting at is, I think we could boost the special ed excess cost revenue. You know, I think 100,000 might be a little bit aggressive. You know, so if that revenue doesn't come through next year, then there's a little bit of risk, but, I mean, I'd be comfortable boosting it 100,000.
And that's for 26, Ben, right? Just to be.
Yes.
It's a good thing Vin stayed.
Did you find anything out there, man?
Yeah, so.
I go back under the microphone now.
Well, I mean, the caveat to all of this, I know it's known, but maybe for the folks at home, of course, these two big yellow lines related to the state, right?
Yeah.
We don't have an adopted state budget. We won't before we have to adopt it in April. We had talked about potentially making some municipal revenue sharing account assumptions. I would not do that based on what I've seen up at the state. They're now saying for 26, it looks like there will not be any allocations out of that. That's impacted by a lot of the uncertainty going on. But we don't know also, right now we're relying on numbers from the governor's proposed budget. There will be a legislative proposed budget probably in the coming weeks. And sometimes with that information, you're able to maybe make a few more assumptions there, but I don't think we'll have that before we're adopting anyway. So, but yeah, if we think reasonably we're gonna, in this case, the excess cost portion is going to increase, then that's certainly 100,000 we can put in there.
Yeah, the related piece to that is if the increase for this year comes in at that full 1.1 million, that is more than what's anticipated for this year, so that I assume goes to fund balance or whatever.
Surplus. So that brings us back, if we go back to this page now with a new revenue number, we're 112 away from the under $700.
As far as the bulky waste thing I mentioned, are we relatively comfortable with that number? Seen by something,
Yeah.
do people want to keep that? I'm just throwing it out there.
It's been 2 years since we've had any bulky trash and people are already clamoring.
Yeah, people are asking.
Yeah, I would think, I mean, this is a
But
different
again,
concept.
you know, is it a nice to have or a must have?
And to John's point, not everybody can actually take advantage of it if you don't have the opportunity to haul it over there, so.
Yeah, it's a limited service. It doesn't really support the town as a whole.
I am absolutely in favor of taking that off.
I mean, is it the cost of getting rid of the bulky waste of the people? Because maybe we do three months during the summer, you just have special days and let people, so you have some opportunity for people to get rid of some stuff if they want, and you kind of.
Or one in the spring, one in the summer, one in the fall.
Because that's
I'm okay with
ancillary
that,
to the contract, right? It's not part of the regular.
Yeah, see, what I would be doing, and I don't know, maybe.
Wouldn't it be
I have my
guided
screen tied up on this, or I'd be pulling out the proposed piece of the HA contract that we had on the table. I did text Dan Romero, but when he gets back here, he can text me, in case he is able to hop back and give us a shorter answer. But yes, we had a fee in the proposed, we had an option to exercise for roll-off container at the Public Works garage. And what I'm trying to recall is exactly, is it just a pay for the disposal, or I think there's a monthly rental also. So if there's a monthly rental, we just need to make, we couldn't just do a couple of events without, or you're just gonna have to take the roll-off more than how often you fill it up, maybe it's the question. I mean, that would be tricky. My hesitation with only doing a couple too is it's very hard to predict the demand. So you just might end up with that traffic on Waterbury Road. The one ill-fated electronics we did at Darcy, that
Yeah.
example, seared in my memory
Yes.
of what can happen when you have a long time in COVID for people to build up a number of things to drop off, and then they're all the way down Waterbury Road from Darcy to like,
Is that what
I don't know, Notch,
Yeah.
and beyond.
I was there that day too.
That bad, really?
It was not good.
So the 57,000 is doing it once a month for a year?
I think it's 51, but.
I just reached out to Dan.
It's around 50,
Yeah.
I did too. Oh, he just got back.
And what would people do if we don't have it at all? They have no opportunity.
Drop off at the garage.
We did have it for 5 years at one point.
What do people do with it, bulky waste? Is there a
You
place-
can't
Yeah, we
take
had
it
gone
back.
5 years at one point.
You go to Ages and
You
pay
call,
$50
you
for
call
every
1-800 got junk,
More than
Yeah.
anything.
Is
Well,
it-
if you can
and you pay
transport
your own
it,
way, they come right to the house, they pick it up, they get rid of it.
They're pretty expensive though, aren't they?
could be,
No idea.
but the other thing is, you can bring stuff to AJ's as well, if there's a cost, as long as you can get it there.
You can rent a dumpster and share the cost with your neighbors.
No, I know those are,
Let me ask you, if you
And
take
those
the
are
50,000
big
off
options.
that, say it's 50,000, you take 50,000 off, how much more does that change the average taxpayer?
A drop in
Dollar?
bucket.
Let me get this back.
Well, that's what I want to just find out, because I mean, if it's, is it worth the taxpayer to pay $3 to?
So, okay, so where we are right now, just to remind folks, we're, with that 100,000, the only tangible adjustment we just made in the last, the others are speculative. The 100,000 we changed on EC, excess cost share, education cost share, brings us to 2985. That, the blue is what's being calculated, the yellow is what we can move around to see how far we are from that. So, 2985, to answer Don's question, if we were to take 50,000 off the town's budget, for that, you would move to 2984. So from $708 for the average taxpayer to $705.
$3. Did you say
$3.
$3 just for you?
It's $3.
Good for that.
$3 per year.
I would think that, I would almost think that taxpayers wouldn't mind paying the $3 for to get rid of their bulky waste.
So they're already paying 700 something more, it's $3, $3. I don't know, we're trying to find.
Well, I know.
Right, there's a cumulative effect, right?
Everywhere.
Well, and I mean, the average taxpayer last year, I thought was around $700. So I think it's like 2 years in a row,
No.
big number.
On the calculator, it shows what last year was,
What was it last year?
It was 400 last year.
400.
right? On your
I
done.
don't remember it being that low.
Yeah.
It was 4 something.
It's,
Yeah.
go to your, go to the 2024.
I just got it. 25, that's what I want. So 2746 is what we
Yeah,
calculated.
396
Last
per
year,
year.
again, which was a complicated calculation, as you know.
Yes, yeah.
The average, many of us, of course, had a lot higher than that. Some people had 0 or even lower. Just last year was a reval year. But on average, what we calculated out was a $400 reduction, though, of 7.6.
All right, so back to this
An
one,
increase of almost 5%.
where are you done?
I still need to go lower, I think. I want to look at some of these numbers that he gave us tonight, but I'm not comfortable there. I'm not, I listen to people like Mr. Izzo who, he's struggling, he's retired and now he's working part-time to make ends meet because he makes under $100,000 a year, but that, we have that elderly tax credit, but it's $52,500 a year for a couple. I mean, I know there are people who take advantage of it, but that's it. Living in this town at $52,500 a year is very
I
difficult.
thought the upper most bracket was 83 or something like that.
Was that?
I thought the upper most bracket was 83 for a couple.
No, it was $52,500, I believe it was.
The couples rate?
Yeah.
No, it was 80.
Was it 80?
Yeah.
Oh, $52,500 for a single.
But
Yeah.
it is only like a $300 credit, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
It
That's not a lot,
pays us to a
it's
very
not a
small-
lot, like he said, his taxes went up $1,300 last year, and they'll probably go up a lot more this year. But, I mean, I worry about people like that. I think, there's a third of our population are over the age of 55.
We should, I brought it up in budget a few times, and we should get to it at some point, I hope, looking at some sort of a stratified approach.
I agree.
And, but we need to look at what those numbers really mean for the people that are going to be paying a lot more.
Right, because then you're shifting that
You're shifting
burden
it,
on
yeah,
them.
you're just shifting it, that's all you're doing, and then, is it,
And it's not just them, I mean, there's families that struggle. They have kids in school, they still struggle. They're not because they're older, they just struggle to stay in the town. And, it's a big change, so.
So let me ask the question differently then.
okay.
Where do you want to land?
I prefer to land closer to 600.
What would that take?
That's gonna take a lot. I know.
We don't, with this, Peter, you mentioned at an earlier meeting, you mentioned splitting this, you just splitting the difference. What that would, which was like 29 and.
A million.
Was that, yeah,
Well, 29.31 was splitting from what I proposed. My proposed mill rate of an increase of 3.7 mils instead of 1.85 mils would be the
Right, but we, so the proposed, so we got, we came down to cutting that in half and that, so that would, which would get us to 6%. Right?
Yeah, so first what Don suggested of being under $600 just happened to be what I first typed in here. 29.50 gets you to under $600.
Which requires another 1.3 million.
1.3 million.
How does
And
that
then,
happen?
and then to get to 29.31.
Really big cleaver.
29.31 is, we're just,
Another
just
2
over,
million.
just over 2 million total.
Sean, could you do me one favor, just with another, I'm sorry,
Oh,
I think
that's
we've
what
done,
it's here for.
and I think, go back to the big numbers, each of the categories in the increases. that,
Oh, down here?
Yeah. So right now, you're still at 2% because you didn't put that 3 in there, but you're down to 2, a solid 2. You were at 2.12 before, I don't know what we added to get you to 2%.
Well, we cut what we believe is, and I
Bulky
don't
waste.
have a full answer yet. I just have the 18,000 for overtime.
That was Peter's
Just total.
Okay. So
Yeah, Dan, Sean, the kind of, all I see here is what the cost for the open dumpsters are per yard.
Yeah.
Bulky waste.
So it's really what we carry for disposal, which is at probably $20 a ton or something.
It's $125 per ton, $269 per haul.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
so
so there's
go
an
back to-
assumption in there. So the tangible number is the overtime. The rest is an assumption on how much bulk waste we're carrying.
So go back to the big numbers. So I mean, I don't know how you're getting more out of the town, so keep on going.
So if I take that 50,000 out, sorry, and go back to here, we're 2.1,
But
there's
if
2.
you put it in, you're at 2%. So let's say the town's at 2%, we'll find 50,000 somewhere.
Somewhere, okay.
I don't know where. And then maybe you can leave the room again for a second. What if we just arbitrarily said that the Board of Education is at 4% rather than 4.4? What would happen?
That's another about 350,
I'm just gonna cheat. What that exactly is.
it's about another, 9 times, it's about $350,000.
I'm not even sure, I just am curious what that would do to us from an increase. I'm not so concerned about the mill rate.
Pretty close.
I think Sean showed us that our mill rate is in a reasonable place. It's a question of the increase to the taxpayer. It's not
So
something-
put in 360 is even better.
So that should bring them down to exactly 4%.
And where does that do for the increase to the average taxpayer?
It would go to
74.
7.5%.
So it's almost still above 7%.
Dan just did text you, the $50,000 rough number assumed 30 tons per month, 125 a ton with a per haul fee of 269. So the exact calculation was 48,220.
So that doesn't include the
Plus
OT then.
overtime.
So there's a little bit more if we take
Maybe
it out.
9, yeah, I would just remind, I think it's 18,000 total overtime, it was a $9,000 increase, because we already had 9,000 for those other drop-offs, non-bulky, that we were doing, that people
So
were,
maybe it's a
if
55.
we cut that too, it's another,
It's about
9,000.
55, 56,000.
somewhere between 55 and 65,000.
Okay.
As it's
Dave?
Yeah, I think we're almost, we're almost 50% higher than we were last year, and last year was a huge tax increase for most people. So, I just don't see how we can get.
Well, 400 to 670,
Right,
675.
right.
So it's not, it's not double, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no, there's about a 50% increase on, even on last year's.
Well, that's taking that all out of the school, this number. That's taking, however much, bringing the school budget down to 4, is that what that number is?
4%.
That's based on
Which
what
is.
Oh, that's
Which
still
would
with, the additional 360 coming out of the budget.
Yeah.
We're not even getting
That's
down
That's
into.
cutting teachers probably, I mean, I don't
Yep.
know, I mean, that's what we start getting.
Honestly, I'm thinking we need to get at least another $1 million.
How?
Yeah.
You're just gonna have, that is gonna be a discussion that we're gonna have to have on our side and on the Board of Ed side. The Board of Ed is gonna have to really sharpen what they're doing and figure out how, I mean, this is, for me, this budget is about what the taxpayers can afford. And again, this is what, our job is to say, what can the taxpayers afford? And we are gonna have to all work within those numbers.
So how many teachers are you willing to cut?
That is gonna be up to the Board of
Well,
Education.
no, we decide because we
No,
decide the
we-
money, so
we
we're
don't decide
responsible.
that.
We're
That's the
the
board.
purse strings,
That
we
is the-
decide, we're
Right.
responsible.
Right, well, we will just, they'll have to have it, the Board of Ed will have to have a serious discussion as to how they want to address those funds. There will be many ways that they can do that.
But like, what would you suggest, if you were on the BOE, what would you suggest?
Yeah.
Because I'm not
Yeah,
seeing
there's
how
gonna
that's
be
even
administrators that
feasible.
will have to probably get cut, there may be teachers that have to be cut, there'll be different things, we have the other programs that they're gonna have to look
I
at.
mean, it's easy to throw and say
Yeah.
$1 million, yeah, cut $1 million, but
Right.
I mean.
Could we do that on
what
the town
exactly?
side?
I don't think we can, but we don't have the same percentage.
Right, but when we had the public hearing, they came out in strong support of the schools, so I would say.
Not that many, not as many as I expected.
That night was 50-50.
Right.
Right.
Thursday night was 50-50.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I understand, look, we all, nobody wants to cut school services, nobody wants to cut town services. We're-
Well, and
yeah,
by the
right.
same token, nobody wants to raise taxes either. but
Right, exactly.
Nobody wants to do anything.
Nobody wants
None of this is
nobody wants to
comfortable.
go backwards.
Right, but I think that there's still, we've still gotta get that number down to a number that's still, I think, because two things. One, we heard a lot of people saying that these tax increases are causing them to consider moving out of town, especially for older people, but for people in general. One of the things that unfortunately that does is when older families or people move out of town, they open up those houses for new families to move in, and new families bring more kids to the school system, more services, and those kids, and that's great because the town's growing, and the problem is we're a victim of our own success. We're a place that people want to be, and so that's where so I see that as an issue. But on the other side, I'm not in a position where I think I want to have people being pushed out of town because of this 2 years of major tax increases. And the problem is this now also sets the new baseline for next year's taxes. If we don't cut funding and spending on this year, that just means, just like what happened last year, it sets a new baseline that's higher than it needs to be. If we're not willing to make significant cuts.
Well,
then
and
we're-
that's
Yeah,
not higher than it needs to be is an opinion rather than.
right.
We did hear from people that, said that things are getting too expensive, and things are too expensive. Everything's too expensive. We also heard from a lot of people saying that I only came here because of the schools.
John?
Yeah, I'm in a quandary with others. I mean, I think that, I know I'm hard on Vin and Jeff, but I think they've worked really hard to show us what they can do. I know Sean has been very transparent with everything on the town side, and I can't thank him enough for offering things that we hadn't even thought of, in terms of reductions. So I do feel we're in a tough place. It's a revenue problem more than a spending problem right now.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
I fully
Yep.
agree.
But unfortunately, it's our problem. Even if it's a revenue problem, we can't control it, and it's our problem. It is there's no question it's a perfect storm. I mean, I feel like George Clooney, so we can take ourselves up the big wave and all die, or we can try and get ourselves back to land here. I don't know. I would like to see it low. I would like to see the tax burden lower, and I don't know. I can't find anywhere else in the town to find cuts that are, 100,000 maybe we could find somewhere. And I think, I don't know what would happen to the board if we asked them for more. I really don't know for sure. I know they would work hard to try and minimize the impact on our children and our teachers. And maybe there's places they would find that. But I would like to see us fight for a reduced increase in taxes. I would like to see it lower, personally.
How would, okay.
Am I comfortable with it? No. do I see where we can logically cut anything else without really making huge sacrifices? No. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I'm sorry if you want to cut you off.
No, go ahead, I jumped in, I should. Dina?
I will go on the record to say I am one of those families that has a very hard time affording most things. I don't have a pass to the pool because it's too cost prohibitive for me. And that's just my lifestyle. I'm used to that, right? Like this impacts me as a family and my family just as deeply as anybody else. There's no number increase that I'm comfortable with. Everything is getting more expensive, everything. Our insurance, our groceries, the goods and services that we need to buy, everything is getting more expensive. So I cannot tell you there's a number that I feel satisfied with. I feel like that is an unfair question personally.
Yeah, but it's, that's the question. That is the question.
I agree. You know what I'm comfortable with? A tax reduction.
Right?
That is what I'm personally comfortable with. That is never going to happen. I'm not even overly comfortable with last year's $400 increase. None of that feels comfortable to me. But being in this process and putting myself here as just this ordinary schmuck, right? I see that there is not an ounce. Oh, thank you. There's not an ounce.
And German schmucks and jeweler, just so you know.
Really? It's good to know.
Stop it. Look it up. We already have one
You're
on
just
the
a
council.
schmuck.
So you can't, you're gonna have to be something else then.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your glory here. But basically, boy, you guys threw me off track.
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make is that being in this process has given me the perspective that I would have never had as an ordinary citizen. That there is not an ounce of waste, there is not an ounce of fraudulent activity, there is not an ounce of anything. Jim, I think you said something that to me really struck home. You said, government work is like a non-for-profit. Everything, government is going to be cheaper than going into the private sector. So I really appreciate the work that you have done, Sean. I really appreciate the work that the Board of Ed has done. I don't feel comfortable just saying that, well, we're just gonna have to take an axe to the Board of Ed without knowing for sure what those consequences are gonna be. And I think it would be really, really short-sighted to just say, well, they're gonna have to do it. If there is a number that we agree to, that we should try to strive for, I would feel more comfortable in saying that that needs to come from both ends and not just on the Board of Ed, because that absolutely impacts our children and that impacts this community. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a number that I'm comfortable with, but that's my answer.
Fiona?
I just don't see where we can cut anymore. It's that simple. We've combed through every line item, we've listened to departments we've visited, we've sat in offices. We haven't even begun to touch capital. But likewise, I thank Sean, I thank Vinny, Jim, everyone, you've worked so hard and you shared with us exactly where our tax dollars go in this town. I agree. I mean, I've combed through some of these books in the past, but not like we've been doing these last couple of years. And if I saw that there was another $1 million to cut, I just don't see what service I'm not willing to close the library, right? I'm not willing to watch our class sizes move up to levels that are going to impact the quality of learning of our students. I don't see the line. We've already met several times, and each time we've asked division heads to look again, look under the sofa cushions, figure out what can we do without. And they've come back to us every single time with, something, okay, if you're willing to cut this, and we did. So I think we're not filling several town positions, we're already cutting, we're gonna have to cut some teachers. We're not gonna refill some of those positions, and it's still too high, right? I agree, this burden is still too high. But I just don't see where else we're gonna get any more at this point. I really don't.
So
One thing, sorry, before you go,
Yeah.
one thing I would say is, if we really wanna if we wanna think a little more seriously about what is core functions of government, right? I don't wanna, give you Agita or anybody else, trash collection is not a core function of government.
Right.
But, like we talked about before, if you don't provide trash collection, the cost to the taxpayer is actually gonna go up, because it's gonna be more expensive for them to do that themselves.
Right.
But it is, if you look at $2 million of trash collection, that gets us well below, or well in the range of what you guys are talking about where you wanna be. That would be a place you could start if you really wanna cut.
We needed to cut.
We don't,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't cut teachers before the trash collection, I wouldn't cut police officers before trash collection, I wouldn't cut
Right.
anything, any of the service we do on the town side before trash collection. Now, it's a service that everybody gets, it's probably the only service that everybody gets in town, which is why we probably don't wanna do that, but, that would be an avenue to consider. I wouldn't wanna do it this year, but given where we are, maybe it's something we should think about.
And just a reminder on that, and we just, maybe for folks watching from home, but the council studied this, very carefully over the months. But when you break out the portion of the mill rate that covers trash collection of that $2 million,
Right.
on average, you get breaking it out, of course, all of our taxpayers, on average, for the average taxpayer, it's about $220 a year. The average, if you talk to anyone in Wallingford or Southington or Simsbury or any town that pays for their own trash collection, I think Wallingford is $117 per quarter, which is about $468 per year. So you are getting yes, you would be saving folks on their tax dollars,
Yeah.
but you'd be doubling their household expenses on trash collection, arguably, depending on where they fall in the range of average taxpayers. Yes, but I know that's something the council is discussing, I kind of want to just put it on the record.
But all the services we provide are extremely efficient, if someone,
So-
if someone decided to do, private education, I spend $20,000 a year on high school education for each kid, and what we offer as a public school is an incredible value, which makes me wonder why the hell I'm doing it, but, it's the way it is with every service, we offer tremendous value. It is going up this year more than we want, it's still a tremendous value, we're still at 29.74 for mill rate, which still is well below a lot of towns.
Yeah, well, it's a debt service, right? It's a debt service that we're dealing with this year, which we knew was gonna be coming. But with the lack of revenue, going back to your point, John, it's the debt service combined with this lack of revenue.
No, that's a perfect start.
Well,
Sean, just quickly, is there any way we can identify any assets that we can utilize and that we can count on being able to sell next year?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about the property, for instance, I go a little farther than next year, close to, let's say, the two school properties, or clearly, we just had a conversation to confirm with, actually, Dan Montero about prepping North Brooksville house for sale and things like that we can do here soon. I would suggest that, obviously, that's one-time revenue coming in, so it's hard to rely on it in the operating budget. I would very much suggest that some of those revenue deposits, when they come in, go into the debt service reserve fund. It was always envisioned that way with the school, part of those school calculators and whatnot. It's not huge money, it doesn't move the needle immensely, but depending on what we were assuming for the sale of Darcy or the sale of Chapman was factored in a little bit to some offset for debt service for those, and that would be a.
So we can't take like that part in Brooksville, maybe say it's worth 100, 150,000 and throw it in as
The
an asset.
problem with doing that, I mean, right, if you did it in just 1 year, it's now a hole you gotta fill, because you approve the expenditures off of that, but you only approve 1 year's worth.
I'm asking a question,
Yeah,
because we really need to find some
Yeah.
funds.
I mean, the other, I just would take a quick opportunity, I don't know if I'm jumping in amongst a lot, but, Jim just referenced core services, and look, just to be clear, towns are in the, fundamentally, right, we're in public safety, public education game. Public works is an extension of public safety, our road infrastructure, those are the reasons we formed communities and towns, and we decided these are the services we really are best sharing the cost in so that we can provide them. But yeah, we have others, and it wasn't trying to, I only started the answer, I think, when I said, where would I go further, we'd probably start with library hours. But the answer is more complicated than that. We have youth services offerings, we have human services offerings. They're very valuable. We sing the praise, we have wonderful employees in those roles. But when you measure some of those youth services after care program type activities, weekends, the pool and arts place are areas where we don't absolutely have to do them the way we do with public safety, with education and other items. So just to be clear, I mean, in that category, I didn't put up on here, the Bartlett Beats concert series, right? We could save that if you'd like. We're also cutting the ribbon on a brand new band shell that the taxpayers help pay for. And I think it would be difficult to not use it. It's a different side of the taxpayer efficiency argument. But just to be clear, if we thought $50,000 was going to make or break the entire budget, we could take that out, and that's probably maybe it's a little less than that because offsetting with the sponsorships John talked about last week. But there's a lot of these places. I just want to make sure they're on the table at least, even if we don't do them, that they're areas we can consider, but we have to make reasonable policy decisions about those. Are those the things that community like this wants to cut?
You know, and anecdotally, because my fiance has apartments and I see tenants come in, many from out of town, I see why, they tell me why they're coming to Cheshire on a regular basis, from all over the place. I met someone today, I happened to be there, was looking for an apartment. Said, I'm from Brookline, Mass. And I said, oh, you know, we're building, I know you're building schools. I want to rent here, but I like the town, I like the tax situation because I eventually want to live here. I want to buy it. People are looking at the town holistically. They're not just looking at the schools. They are looking at the schools, but they're looking at the town holistically. We've done a good job in every aspect with all the parks, with the quality of our street system, with our trail that's going right through. Everybody, it's amazing. You see people, the research they do. And Cheshire is a quiet town that people actually find a lot out about, and they want to be here for all the reasons that we're trying to protect here. So I think we have an obligation to try and protect them and keep the taxes down. It's almost an impossible task each year, but that's our obligation, I think, is to not take away those fundamental elements that are not necessarily just directly public safety. And
Well, and that's a good segue into my opportunity then. I'm your Cheshire resident that is fixed income guy. You know, there's no more raises in my book unless Social Security goes up, so. Just as an aside from that real quick, I did ask Sean in September to put on our books buildings, you know, another look at Darcy, Chapman, North Brooksvale, you know, all the properties that we have to take a look at. I think it would be prudent for us to use some planning money that we do have in the budget to take a look at 4-day work week, see if there's any value or savings there. Future of the community pool continues to be, as you know, Sheila was very clear about the other night, we're looking at, you know, a building closing in on 30 years. And, you know, are we at the point where the capital investments are gonna outweigh the benefit? And so I think those are things to study. Just indulge me for 1 second, Sean. If you went to, just use line 25 there and put in 2.34 million, which is the increase in debt service, isn't it? Somewhere close to that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay, but it exactly that, but you're looking at this 2.3.
Yeah, 2.3, yeah, sure, perfect. And then just, where does that,
Yeah,
I mean,
that still
technically,
has that Board of Education adjustment. that we just threw in
Yes.
there, so hypothetical.
Okay, well, I'll put it here under debt service.
Yep. Perfect.
So as though we didn't, right, our debt service, if our debt service was flat. Right?
Yep, close enough, that's good enough. So, and where does 2916 bring us?
But
So-
that includes, as Fiona just said, it does include that arbitrary, somewhat arbitrary reduction in the Board of Education of 360,000.
Yes.
It's rounding from 4.4
Yeah.
zero. Just so you know what we're talking about, that's all.
Yes.
Okay.
And honestly, I think we have to go there, because here's what I'm trying to get to, and then go back to the other page. You know, and you can take that debt service number out of the other side. That $2.3 million that we started negative in the hole, and that's not assuming the $1 million in the hole we started because of motor vehicles. And, you know, it just goes on and on and on with what we've referred to as the perfect storm. But we have to remember that the taxpayers at referendum told us they wanted the schools. And they knew that that was a $400 increase for several years. And so you take that 400 out of there, and you're now at 273, which isn't a bad number. I look where we started from, which was being in a, what was the hole we were in? 15 million?
12% increase.
Yeah. And we got to, or right now, we are at the government, scroll up just a tad. I mean, general government, a 2.0 increase for general government basically is not even covering contractual services and union contracts and everything else. So, you know, for Jim and for Sean and the department heads, I can't see us going back to general government saying, go ahead, just slash services and, you know, take us to a place that I don't think any of us want to go to. Education started with an increase of 6.2. They have come up with 2.6. You know, they're at 4%. I think that's completely reasonable.
But that's with additional.
If that's with an additional 360, just in full disclosure, I didn't eliminate that. But, you know, so they're already gonna have to feel some pain beyond what they've felt to get to where we are. And, you know, at the end of the day, from where we started, I'm shocked we got as good as we got. That's what I am.
And one of the things for me that I'm concerned about now, we've been talking mostly about residential, but also the bigger problem I'm gonna see is that would be the impact this is gonna have on our commercial and business development here in town. You know, obviously, we've been successful in that, but, you know, our existing commercial taxpayers are now gonna face a fairly significant increase in their taxes, more so than just $673 a year. You know, they're talking thousands of dollars a year for most of our commercial and business owners. So, so that's another concern I would have on that as well. The other thing, my concern is, you know, we've started with some of the state stuff too, but it would be nice if some of our, if we got a little bit, I feel a little bit more representation from our state delegation, and that, you know, they were looking out a little bit more for our interest as far as providing more resources to the municipalities than they are. They've been very stingy, especially in a town like Cheshire.
We did get a 50% reimbursement rate.
Right.
It was 12% higher than we had before.
Well,
Yeah, but
There's that.
there's other towns that got even better than that.
True.
Yep, and there's other towns, you know, similar situated to Cheshire who are getting much better reimbursements than we are. So it would be nice, you know, for them to take a look at that when they're looking at the budget, you know, to look at the rate that we're getting reimbursed for some of these things. Obviously, we've been getting sort of screwed by the state for many years, and it's not getting any better. And, you know, the other thing too is, when it comes to some of the, you know, the expenses we're looking at now with the, you know, with the debt service, part of that is because we used a lot of resources last year to get the debt, to get the taxes down to the 400 and something dollars it was last year. So I think we overused the, you know, the revenue, the resources and the fund balance last year to get that budget down now, so that there isn't those resources this year to try to flatten out that, you know, that debt reserve issue when it comes to the schools. So, so we created somewhat a hole for ourselves, which we predicted last year was gonna happen, because we knew this year's budget was gonna be worse than it is last year. And now we're facing that hole that was created by overusing the budget reserve last year to create an artificially low budget increase, which was still very high, to now create one that's still very high.
So you're saying we should have had higher taxes last year? Or we used less of the general fund last year, that's what you're saying?
I think
So we should have had a higher mill rate last year, you're saying?
we should have cut more last year, instead of relying
It should have been
completely
lower.
on. We should have cut more rather than just rely on fund balance.
So I had a conversation with Yetta from the chamber, and she has a major concern, because she's talked to a number of businesses who actually have dropped out of the chamber because they don't want to pay the fee for that. She's got a concern with all the businesses in town and how they're going to afford another tax increase like this. And I understand it, being a small business owner, I get it too, because, you know, my taxes are going up for my business as well. So I have to balance that out. And, you know, I had 3 young couples who the past week come into my office, all born and raised in Cheshire. And all 3 of them said they cannot afford to live in this town. So they're buying homes in Prospect or Wolcott or Wallingford, somewhere else, because they can't afford it. And it's disappointing to hear that, because, you know, it's a sign of the times for everywhere. I think it's difficult for any young person.
It
housing
definitely
is
is.
Well, yeah,
I was gonna
that part
say,
of
and
it.
that's,
But they said, you know, everything's
It's
expensive.
Connecticut, yeah.
Everything is expensive, and you know, but it's sad to hear that, you know, people who want to be here can't afford it, and I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not one to just slash to slash. That's not who I am. I just feel, you know, you ask me where I'd be comfortable, I'd be comfortable at 600. I'd be comfortable where Dina is at 0. But, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I
not
think we all
realistic.
would be.
It's just something that we have to figure out what's the right balance here. And it's a 50% increase over last year's taxes, and then, you know, that's what concerns me.
You're not gonna be able to make the fact that we have to pay for the schools go away.
Oh, absolutely not,
Right.
absolutely not.
And we're pretty close to that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we have to remember, and we talk about taxes, but, you know, there is a correlation between our property values and our taxes. So there are 8 towns that will, of this list of 30 peer towns, there are 8 towns that will have lower mill rates than we do once we make that change. And there are 21 that have higher mill rates than ours, which means for them to have the same house value that you have now, and if you took that house and went to 21 other towns, you would be paying higher taxes with less services. So I think that needs to be hammered home too.
Right, but that assumes that those houses are that value in those towns. I mean, you can't just say, we're gonna take
But
a
if-
$600,000
if you took-
town and drag it
But
to
if
there.
you took a $500,000 home and wanted a $500,000 home in one of those other towns, you'd be paying a lot more in taxes with a lot less services.
And some of that has to do with when they're reevaluating too, so we don't know where those towns are in terms of that process. And Peter, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think
Well,
it's-
and the ones that are lower than us,
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those had the reval the same year we did.
okay, so they, but I think Cheshire is a good is a good balance. There's no question Cheshire's a
Yeah.
good balance. I think, you know, it's been a well-run town, it continues to be run, there's a lot of benefits. I'm, you know, I've never been in the public sector up until the last few years ago, always in the private sector. I've sat in a room like this to deal with much smaller numbers, and there was never anyone to bail me out. I couldn't go to the taxpayer and say, or the client and say, well, you didn't pay us enough this year, so you have to pay us a little bit more because we're not making ends meet. And we had to make hard decisions, year after year after year. And some years it was easy because we had plenty of money and we spread the wealth. Other years, I mean, there were years when I asked every owner in the room to take a 25% cut in salary because we had to get through a tough year and I didn't want to lay anybody off. And everyone agreed. It was a voluntary thing. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. People weren't making that much money to take that big a cut. I think we still have an obligation to ask for a little bit more in terms of sacrifice before we're done. I just do. Not from our townspeople, but from the town as a whole, whether it's the board or the town. And I think I couldn't agree more that Sean's done everything he can within reason. I think 2% is reasonable. I mean, the cards aren't in our favor right now, and I think we have to look for something else. Not much more, but I'd like to see a little bit more to be comfortable that we've done the best we can for the townspeople, and put the burden on the management of the town and on maybe a little bit on services. Maybe there's just a few services they miss. I'm fine with the bulky waste for 1 year to get rid of it, and that's a loss in services. But at least not everyone in the town is paying for something that maybe a handful of people use. So.
Well, it isn't really a loss in services, we weren't offering it, it was an addition that we weren't gonna.
Well, people expect that.
Well, there's no reason for them to expect it every 2 years, we just started doing it every 2 years a couple years ago.
Well, you know how that is.
Yeah, and
Once you start it.
there was a stretch where we went 5 years without
And
it.
maybe
so.
we'll go again, but maybe it comes
Two
back,
of
yeah.
the last 3 years, we didn't even pay for with tax dollars, and one was Biden funds and the other was something else.
Yeah.
I think people here have worked really hard, and not just people in this room, but obviously Vin, Sean, and all the staff people. I couldn't agree with some of the comments made before. I mean, every year at this budget process, I'm never more amazed, always amazed at the concern for the community by every department head. I mean, everybody comes here watching their numbers, trying to do the best they can. No one is selfish or is just relaxed about how they spend our money. Everyone, it's a great culture.
Will this be the last one that Vin's gonna be part of? Are you?
After tonight, yes.
Is this it? Oh, you should have brought a cake. You should have.
Wait for that one.
sad.
It doesn't have a short time. Then skip.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously, so Peter, the difference between us was about 600,000, give or take, right? Because you came up, you added another 300,000 to the 360. So
We
yeah,
got a 50,000 cut from the town side for the bulky waste drop off, and 360 for additional Board of Education adjustment.
Yep.
I think we're getting as close as we're gonna get. I'd like to see if we can find a
And
little bit
that's,
more.
yeah, 2 and 4 from where we started is,
I agree.
we've cut a third of the deficit that we were faced with. And a lot of that was on lost revenue side and debt service.
we could have probably saved another $200,000+ if we had switched it away from Chesapeake. So,
Not the case.
and away from the, and create, we would have.
It was $126,000 was the savings you guys were talking about. Now we're like net, well below that.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't, I'm not sure you wanna go there.
Just speaking of Chesapeake, I did not make any adjustment to that number we talked about at the beginning of this discussion. If
I mean-
you would like me to.
They are proposing $10.15, so I don't see
Then
that.
if you want, yep.
So let's make that negative 27 instead of the plus 2296. There you go. All right, let's drum roll. Did that, Is that even, that's not even the proverbial deck chair off the Titanic?
Did that make it move?
No, it didn't.
Nope.
It's still 29 cents.
What was that?
Remember, every 100th of a mil is $40,000. Depend on where, you know,
Yeah.
it means we're
So
actually.
we went from
rounding error.
We went from a positive there to a
Yeah.
negative, so
There
that's
you
a
go.
good
That's a
sign.
sign.
I got a place to save money. How about turning off the heat on April 15th so we don't have to open the window?
It's tough.
I'm burning over here.
As far as revenues go, there isn't anywhere else we want to revisit on revenues? Part
Did
of
we-
revenues?
I can put it,
Or do you guys
maybe
want to-
briefly, but we.
I don't think in the departments, what, is there any comfort level in assuming that,
I mean, I just,
kind of a silly question, but in assuming that we're gonna get more money from the state either for MRSA or ECS?
Merced, from what I've seen, that is not.
There's
happening.
no
There
hope.
won't be a
What about-
distribution in '26.
Anybody got any, anybody heard anything ECS wise?
Any grants around there?
I don't want to even bring up what's been proposed in legislation that could go against us, but.
Yeah, no, don't that.
Oh, God,
Yeah, we don't have to go through these necessarily, but we did, you know, I'm more comfortable, a little more comfortable with the building official number here. We are up $100,000. We've seen a few major proposed projects kind of come across in the last few weeks that might, that could be, that could support, what we know has been an elevated number.
You know, I know Elon Musk's talking about a big expansion and some projects like that that might generate,
Going back to,
close that gap.
sorry,
Next year.
going back to,
Yeah.
John's brought up the property next to the school a few times, the North Brooksville. We don't think you can sell that in the next year?
We can.
We can't, but
Yeah,
Sean
we
said for
can.
some reason it doesn't go directly into it as a
Might go into
positive.
You could, I mean, it could go straight into revenue, it would support surplus, you could budget it as like a one-time revenue. So absolutely you could, but
They could support
I-
the bulk trash bin.
I would, that one's gonna be a smaller number, but I think on the bigger school, especially because they're related to the debt service, we're paying for 2 replacement schools. I would suggest that we put that money in towards
Into
debt
debt
service,
service,
and then
absolutely.
we are able to pull that down, because remember, I hate to, be the bearer of bad
Yeah,
news,
you
but
got another spike
debt service
next
has
year.
another large component next year. This year, we're only paying interest only on that $60 million issue, so we pay our first principal payment in the next operating budget. So, plus another issuance, so it's not the first time we're gonna be talking about another increase. And we did go back and run the numbers, I know there's some question about the 400 to 420 average taxpayer impact of the schools. And that, remember, that's amortized over 20 years. And the way we amortize debt, it's like 600 in the early years and it's like 200 in the years 15, 16, and 17. But it does average to, it still is holding out. It's around that $415, $420 per average taxpayer. But what's not happening is kind of, as though we were trying to make some connections there in terms of the increase of 600. It's not all in one year. It's not like that's the entire component of that $600 increase this year. So, or 50. We will have another year of that, and we'll also soon have some offsetting revenue from the north end that is we all can't wait to have and use
Yes.
to support that. And ultimately, we could make the case that the north end develop itself, if everything else was held constant, is going to pay for almost, I think, 70 or 80% of the cost of the debt service on those schools. If you wanted to strictly look at that revenue for that purpose.
Hey, Sean, can you do us a favor? Can you send this, the new one, this new updated,
The department revenue or
the
worksheet.
The worksheet
Sure.
to us, and can you also add in our top 10 taxpayers and what the change in their taxes will be this year? So I can see that.
Yes. I would suggest you should include last year's too.
Yes.
Top 10
There's a
is
lot
the
of-
highest dollar?
Yeah.
The highest taxpayers in town, yeah.
Yeah.
But last year, for some, we went down.
Yes.
significantly.
Well, I know, because I know some commercial went down, that's why I'm.
Well, remember, it shifted from the
Right.
commercial to us.
I know, that's what I
So yeah,
wanna
that's the
see.
only reason I would suggest having 2 years, because I think it would paint a little bigger
Yes.
picture
Mhm, I agree.
to see both. Yeah.
All right, it's getting late early. We're a week away from a vote. Are we comfortable at 10 of 10 on Tuesday? Do we want to have another opportunity to look at things on Thursday? Would be our only chance to do so.
Would that give you enough time, Sean?
Thursday, next week,
Oh, that's right, you're not here Thursday.
we're not here Thursday night, no, we're closed Friday, and I'm traveling on Thursday.
Yeah.
So a lot of different, you guys can have.
Yeah. We could meet and,
Yeah.
you know, we can operate it.
Town offices are closed Friday, so it's.
Yeah,
normally
we
at
would
night
have
would
to
be
do it,
open.
we would have to do it
We could,
Thursday.
we can.
But if we gave, you know, well, let's see, can we get there tonight? Can we get to, are we okay with going forward with 2974 tonight?
And that's keeping in that 360.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's kind of the best we can do. People would make money.
I'm not ready to do that yet.
John isn't here.
I'm okay with this only because I don't know what else we could possibly have.
I don't like using that 360, but
I know.
if we go to.
Who's taking the straw poll? Oh, I'm
Is
sorry.
there,
Are you, that's okay, would you be tonight comfortable with having Sean and Jim go ahead with a 29.74 mill rate and an average increase of 673?
I'd still like to see a little bit more from my perspective, if possible.
Is it worth holding Thursday night? In other words, we've got to do this by, we got to give a direction by Thursday to be able to vote next Tuesday.
I'm available to come back in and keep on working on it, I think it's that important.
Sean is not available, so Sean.
And Sean is not available, but we can.
We can
And
talk,
operate
if Vin's
a
not here, it'd be
calculator.
perfect, we can talk about Sean and Van at the
Is
same
that
time.
enough time for you, Sean?
It's really a Jim question, but yeah, I mean, we've done the reason we ask for at least a couple days in advance is
I
there
tend
are
to-
a series of
I'm concerned.
resolutions that have to be produced, and then there's I can show you an example of, it's almost, I mean, Jim's been working on it, but it is, we have formal resolutions built around this document, which will memorialize all of the actual budget line items that we've been talking about, and we just have to check and double check and make sure it's accurate. This is the ultimate, remember when I said there's mill rate sensitive items, that's these that I've bolded. This is the adjustment in the tax levy. These are all of the account numbers in revenue that need to be adjusted, and ultimately what you will publish that the changes we make are as tied to the resolution. And then these are all of the expenditures that will do the same thing we've all talked about. This is that rounding placeholder.
Yeah.
As a reminder, we have not settled our WPCD or pool budgets yet. I'd like to take at least a quick opportunity. On the WPCD, the budget as presented relied on a use of fund balance that is ever depleting there, that I don't think we can be doing anymore. So my charge, we talked about this at the end of that workshop, actually after the
Yes.
WPCD, was to adjust their, they had a fee increase proposed of $5. I think that needs to be a $20, it's a $15 increase to what they proposed. Fee adjustment to generate this revenue, because we were using $320,000 of fund equity, which we just can't do. They need to have, I think we need a balanced budget there. To offset another chunk of that, I would reduce A&E supplies by $100,000. That's the one they had increased for in-kind services. Used to be in the capital budget. They moved it in at a higher amount, $215,000. Taking $100,000 out of that, they still have a remainder of an old capital account they could use. $50,000 from that construction line. Somebody asked that at the meeting, and I would cut that. And then there's a portion that they pay of that insurance line we have that nets that out to a flat budget. It's a reduction of 153. You see the revenues, and now there's no more use of fund equity. Jessica, that's all good, right?
Right.
All good there? Good, okay. And then that would be, so you'll just need to know that because you are also approving that budget and
Yes.
the assumptions that go along. Remember, the fee itself is set by the WPCA, but we do make a suggestion, and they did not raise their fee last year, so I think that needs that. And with the community pool, the simple adjustment is fees go up 100,000, subsidy goes down 100,000 as revenue. So that's the only change there. Right now, we're not proposing any expenditure changes in our budget, at least that's what we're saying. Sorry, back to what I was saying, we just need more than a day, or we could maybe squeeze it in one day if Jim's really, really good. The closest we could cut it would be if you had a meeting, I guess, Monday night.
But as far as,
If you wanted to adopt Tuesday, it's just a lot of work for them to get done in a matter of
Yeah.
hours.
as far as the calendar, why do we have to adopt that Tuesday?
Because that's the only date we have left before, because then I'm gone the following week, the 28th. We have it by charter, we have until the 30th,
Sure.
but I'm gone as of the 28th.
We did have the 24th as
Yep.
proposed adoption, but I
But
think
that was,
David's
David
away.
can't make it, so we're trying to do 22nd so
Gotcha.
everybody can be.
Do we need to get a budget committee resolution in there somewhere too, to send it to the full council? That's not necessary.
No,
It's not necessary.
historically, no.
Okay.
there's been times when we have done that,
I
but
didn't know if it was necessary, that's a
Yeah.
procedure.
We-
Right,
we
really acting
can-
as committees the whole here.
I was gonna say, you've
I
got
know
the
that.
whole
I
group
know that, I
here
didn't know if
tonight.
it was, we had to
And,
fit that in
and
somewhere.
honestly, John, the more I think about it, you know, are we gonna get, if we put in another night, are we gonna get anything significant that we haven't thought of tonight?
I think it's judgment calls at this point, that's all this.
I know.
What questions haven't been asked? Like,
I know.
What are we
I
missing?
think
If
the
there's
big
something we're missing.
discrepancy is over there on the 360 on the board then.
Service you
Yeah.
wanna
Okay.
adjust, there's a service that you wanna
Yeah.
either cut or curtail or adjust.
On the sound side, I can't think of anything, and on the Board of Ed side, I mean, honestly, we don't know what we'll do, even with the 360, what we'll do, we just don't know. You're right.
It's already been positioned, so
Well,
it's
it's up to the
probably.
superintendent and the board. You know,
Yeah.
and the one thing I will say, just as a reminder, enrollment is increasing. All the cost increases that the taxpayers are dealing with, well, we're dealing with them too. I mean, everything that we buy, whether, you know, it's salt for the schools or school supplies, those have an inflation. You know, inflationary impact, not to mention wages. But, yeah, so this is significant, you know, it's beyond where we presented, so the superintendent, the board, and I will have to, you know, figure out what's the least impactful way to achieve that additional 360.
Yeah, it just, I would add from our perspective, I mean, 1.93%, I think we already said it, that is,
Yeah.
on my side, that is a cut. I mean, we're
So
cutting.
you're now at 1.93, you're below 2 now, to 1.93?
That's
Taking
the,
50,000
we took the bulky waste
Oh, I
out.
thought that
So-
was the 2, okay. You sure that wasn't in the 2?
There's another,
I thought you had already taken that out to get to 2.
Oh, right, so we were at 2 even.
But you put something else in there too.
Oh,
Oh,
you
the
adjusted-
Chespercott?
Chespercott.
Yeah,
No,
that's the
go-
new 27,000 for Chespercott.
Go
and
back
then-
up, what's the 50?
And then 50
There
is
it
the
is.
proposed festival, yeah. So the Chespercott moved us now to 1.93%. So again, just year over year from services, that's,
But is the Chescott thing, you can do that? I thought we're assuming there's no change in Chescott. I don't understand. what we're-
They're going, a dollar per capita, they're coming down.
We're
Coming
reviewing it
down.
tomorrow.
They're gonna vote
That's
tomorrow.
estimating.
they're looking at it tomorrow night. So it's an assumption, so.
It's we're assuming.
The only thing I will say that does help offset that a little bit is it's technically in the same budgeted line as the other public health service, which is our ambulance. And remember, I'm assuming a $50,000 rebate. This year we got 80 plus. So if for some reason the Chespercott cut didn't come through and we got 80 again, technically we have enough in that line to pay Chespercott what our bill would be.
Or we could assume
Peter, you would do the straw poll, and I was in, and I was, do you have the votes to get it through? I mean, I wanna think about it some more, but I mean, do you have the votes to give Sean direction to go with it?
Yes,
You do?
but, I mean, if,
Fiona, you were okay with the additional?
I'm not okay, no, I don't like that
No.
360 cut
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
calculation.
That's the
but
biggest
not for
sticking
the,
point.
not for the same reason.
Yeah, I think it's already gone too far. I'm worried about what that's gonna do to our schools right now. I'm really worried about what that's
I
gonna
know,
do.
we all
I'm
have
worried.
things that we.
We're all worried about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Peter, we also have Tricia to consider.
Yeah.
I don't know what your stance, I mean, you guys talk to her separately, I'm sure.
We'll, we'll catch her up after tonight, but I don't know. I just, I'm not sure, you can, there comes a point where,
No, I agree.
you
You're in a leadership role, I mean, it's your.
I think we're all looking for it to go down, you guys are all there, and then you're ready to go back up, so I think on our side, if you guys have the, if you wanna go forward with it, I'm not sure whether another meeting's gonna make a difference, but that's gonna be up
Yeah.
to keep.
Well, and I guess that's where I am too. I mean, based on where I hear, John, I think you're kind of in the middle. You'd like to see less, but you'd also support where we are. I don't think Don and Dave, I don't think another night is gonna get us to a point
Unless
where
you know what to
they're-
cut, unless you have
Right,
something to
you know,
propose
so-
right now.
Look at it, I'll find
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
I'll find something.
All right, I do wanna read these into the record, though. These are more comments, and this has been extremely helpful, so thank you for facilitating this. I think having the feedback from the public is invaluable. And there's 5, so bear with me, I'll be as fast as I can. I first want to thank you for volunteering your time. I know there are very difficult decisions to be made. I'm writing to you today as a homeowner in Cheshire. I understand not wanting to cut jobs, as the town considered some departments doing a 4-day, 32-hour work week. At 32 hours, people can retain their benefits. It would also mean a, 1/4 pay decrease, or 1/5 pay decrease if they did that from a 40-hour down to being paid for only 32 hours. For example, if you close the library on Wednesday, you can save on those hours, plus save on heat, electricity, etc. I know we will receive more tax income in 2027 from the north end. At that time, you can look at those departments that went to a 4-day work week and see if increasing hours is needed. I've been following the studies of a 4-day work week, and employees and employers have been happy with the change. I do think you need to continue a hiring freeze. I think you need to raise the rates on pool passes and out-of-town day passes. Done. Even though I don't use the pool now, I did enjoy it when my daughter was younger. I have lived in Cheshire for 30 years in a very modest ranch. The last tax increase was felt and did affect my budget. I was expecting to pay the $400 a year increase for the new schools, but it seems it's going to be a lot more than that. Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best in the next couple of weeks. Sincerely, Yetta Auger, 29 Chantil Circle. I've lived in Cheshire since 1993, over 31 years. Over those years, I've volunteered for many community programs, including the Old Cheshire Newcomers Club, Doolittle School Store, and PTA Cheshire, Cheshire Community Theater, Cheshire Community Chorus. I work the polls at election time. I volunteer at and donate to Ball and Socket Arts. Because I was in a better position than most at the time, I donated one of my COVID stimulus checks to Cheshire Human Services. I am not trying to toot my own horn, but I am hoping to illustrate that I'm a valuable resident of the town. For 21 years, I worked for a business on Highland Avenue. For the last 12 plus years, I've worked in the finance department at Town Hall. While most years a wage increase of 2 to 3% is kept up with the cost of living, things are now different. I can't be satisfied with the 3% increase for myself or my coworkers, and I'm hearing that we may get no wage increase at all this year. This is unacceptable. I don't think that's accurate. This is unacceptable. Since our last contract, Town Hall union salaries have had a total gross increase of roughly 10% in that same amount of time. Since 2020, the Consumer Price Index has increased 23%. Social Security cost of living increases were 1.3, 5.9, 8.7, 3.2, and 2.5 respectively from 20 to 24. Car insurance rates in 24 were 33% higher than they were in 21. home insurance has risen an average of 24% between 21 and 24. Even though the percentage employees pay for health insurance has stayed low, the overall cost still increases year after year, so we are paying more. On top of that, this year's revised proposed budget includes a tax increase that will average over $700 per household. My taxes increased over $800 last year. With the recommended mill rate, I am looking at an additional $600. I am aware that the mill rate has decreased, but due to the revaluation with this new budget, my property tax will have increased 29% since '21. Since I have no intention of selling my house, the increased market value is nothing to me. I love this town and I don't mind paying taxes. I've heard many residents arguing not to cut the education budget. I also heard people talk of cutting benefits or going to a 4-day work week. These are people's jobs we're talking about. The employees of this town are the ones who make everything run smoothly, provide service to our residents, and assure that our vendors are paid timely. I understand there is now a hiring freeze, which means that those of us already working for the town will need to do more. Salary increases should reflect both this and the economic realities of the day. Kim Wentroba, 61 Blue Ridge Circle. Thanks to the Town Council and Board of Ed for giving the citizens a chance to present their positions on the budget. A few items to share. One, Mr. Talbot shared that homeowners 65 plus can apply for either that state or Cheshire Homeowners Tax Credit Program. In reviewing the program online, the income limits are low considering a couple that is getting both Social Security and a pension. In our case, I am still working part-time to make ends meet in addition to our Social Security and pension. Can the town look at increasing the limit for a couple to at least 100,000? Number two, as I mentioned last night, I live in a 55 plus community, Richmond Glen. In addition to paying property, car, sewage tax to the town, we also pay an HOA fee of $425. That fee covers plowing, streetlights, maintenance of our sewage system, and of course we have no children in the school system. I'm suggesting the town consider a program for those living in a 55 plus to get a tax reduction, as we are certainly not benefiting from many services provided to the other homeowners. Or could there be a phase out of taxes by taxing us only for the non-education portion of the budget? Three, it was mentioned last night that town/schools had not solicited bids for healthcare costs for the past few years. I'd suggest this needs to be done quickly and before the budget is passed. There could be a significant cost savings we are not aware of. Four, does the school budget reflect the latest projections of SPED students that will be out of the district? Five, what is the education budget's real current projection? Will there be an underrun that can be reserved and offset FY26 costs? And reviewing the March 25 report, there are large balances in many budget lines, yet the year-end balance is projected at zero. I'd suggest this needs to be carefully reviewed by the BOE. Six, does the education budget include the latest projections for both ECS and excess cost grant for SPED students? I know the state is still working the biennial budget, but they are now projecting higher ECS and excess cost funds than were anticipated earlier in the year. These are major sources of revenue and need to be current/accurate. Thanks for taking the time to consider my comments. I am sorry for the lengthy comment. Mark G. Izzo, 245 Richmond Glen Drive. Thank you for letting me voice my concerns on the budget. My name is Mandy Miller and I have been a Cheshire resident these past 15 years. We came here, as did many others, for the school system, and at that time the lower tax structure and mill rate. Over the years the mill rate has gone up, it's gone down, but I've never felt overly burdened by my taxes. The schools were good, the streets were clean, the town seemed well supported, and overall I felt secure in school, in the path our town seemed to be headed. I write to you now alarmed and extremely concerned that our town is heading towards a tax crisis and burden that I can only compare to our neighbors in Hamden. Hamden's mill rate is over 55. That's my editorial comment. My initial concern for this year's potential tax increase at a time where households are already feeling the strain of higher cost of living in way of food, basic goods, utilities, insurance costs, was that this might become the tipping point for many households. We need to consider that the impact of financial stressors spans out to the community as well, putting additional strains on our human services and resources from our town for support when families can no longer make ends meet, our schools, teachers, and guidance counselors, as the stresses of struggling households spill out onto the children affected. Not to mention the impact on local businesses as households pull back on entertainment and goods and services for the community it could no longer afford. After most all households have already seen an increase in taxes last year, even though the mill rate went down, another large increase I thought was just too much. But then I realized as I pored over the budgetary numbers, this is just the tip of the iceberg ahead of us. Last year in Cheshire, the average single-family home sales, 225, were in the amount of $572,000. New construction averaged $913,000, and in parentheses, 28. On page 4 of the proposed 25-26 budget, the council proposes a average residential taxpayer. For nice, easy numbers, we will use a value of $500,000, making the assessed value 70%, $350,000. That would make their taxes at the current mill rate at purchase $9,611. At this newly proposed mill rate, this family's taxes will go up to $1,295, but that's just the beginning. Based on the town of Cheshire's 5-year budget projections for fiscal years 27 to 31, this resident will see another increase in 27 of $780, $521, $637, $661, $808 respectively over the next 5 years, where their taxes are now $14,315 annually at a 40.9 mill rate, having gone up $4,705, a 48.95% increase in just 5 years. Further concerning the long-term debt service projections as a percentage of general funds budget shows these increases are only set to continue and get worse as we bear the increasing burden of this ballooning debt service. Do we have a plan in place to keep Cheshire affordable for our residents, municipal workers, teachers, and others that live on fixed income budgets? Going back to the budget in front of us, I implore you to all look at these numbers and bring it back to a more conservative approach to management. As notated on this same graph, these numbers are based on an annual 2.5% increase in operating budget expenditures. However, your fiscal year budget projections are based on assumptions that are far too high and also inaccurate, which could be misleading to the public. The annual educational increase is noted at 5.16% is a 5-year historical average, which is incorrect. When looking at the multi-year budget comparison in the past, budget increases have been able to be held under 3%, which is a national benchmark goal for inflation and cost of living / wage increases. Continuing to budget above that will lead us further into insolvency. I would implore you to reach back out to each and every department and share the concerns presented to you today. Are they aware of the intended increase and impact their combined requests will present to the members of the community? In conclusion, for the health of the community at large, I hope you take action to mitigate the cost to us, the taxpayers. I personally have spent the last 3 years through blood, sweat, and tears renovating what I considered my forever home in Cheshire. It deeply pains me to think I might have to walk away, but if this is the trajectory Cheshire is going, myself and I'm certain many others will have no other choice. I thank you for the opportunity to voice my concerns, and I thank you for your service to the town of Cheshire. Mandy Miller, and I don't see an address. Last one. Good evening, I just finished watching your live stream and I too do not envy the position you are in and I appreciate your time and efforts. I am very close to retirement and hope to stay in Cheshire, but the way the taxes are looking, I'm not sure that I can. I echo the sentiments the gentleman who spoke about living in a 55-plus community and his HOA fees. I live in the Old Town condos and love it here. I don't use many of the town resources either. I am happy to hear of the elderly tax relief program and will definitely check that out as my retirement gets closer. I am proud to be a Cheshire resident and hope to continue through my later years. It scares to think of having to move again. I wouldn't be able to afford much. In terms of where to make cuts, I think the same, that some extracurricular sports should definitely be looked at, as well as the gifted and talented program. There are plenty of places in Cheshire for kids to be outside, and although the gifted program is nice, is it necessary? Does it benefit the greater portion of Cheshire people? I hate to make cuts to schools. I have family working in the public education system, and I know things are tough enough, but it must be done. Thank you, Amelia Yankovich, 18 Old Town Road.
Very nice.
Incredible input from residents
Yeah.
this season.
Yes, it's been,
This has
it's
been a
been
really
very
great
good.
season for that.
Yep.
What was the number you decided, or what we settled on the number, the 29, what's, 27.74?
2974.
2974.
Okay, thank you, I had it backwards, I'm like, that.
And you're gonna, or you probably have already. Well, I just gave you 15 minutes to, yeah.
Everybody
right.
already has.
All right, thank you all. Much later than I wanted to be, but I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think when we started from where we started, I honestly don't think we were ever gonna get to a situation where we had 9 unanimous votes for a budget. So, and hey, that's the way of the world. So, you know, I've seen it. Let's put it this way: I've seen a heck of a lot more non-unanimous votes than I have unanimous votes in my tenure on the council. So, with that being said, thank you again, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just a no meeting Thursday then.
No meeting Thursday night.
So moved. Second.
1 and 2, got 'em? All in favor? Thank you.
Been great.